All right, B Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Tuesday, May 7th. I'm ready to talk some Notre Dame football. I think you guys are all ready to talk some Notre Dame football too. That's why you are here with me. And we're going to have some fun. We're going to have some fun today. At least I'm going to have some fun today. And I hope you guys are ready to have some fun with me. So we're going to talk about really three things today, three topics. We're going to have three segments of today's show. Segment one is going to be, and it kind of comes up with a conversation that really started on the message board. And so I was going to kind of go a couple different directions today, and I was going to talk about, the D line, and I was going to talk about, maybe the wide receivers and dive into a couple Notre Dame team topics. But there was a conversation that kind of is going around, and, Notre Dame top 25 rankings coming out. And so I want to talk about this as we kind of kick off our race to the start of the season, right? And the topic is basically going to be, is Notre Dame closing the gap? And the answer simply is going to be yes, but then we're going to talk about, but how much? Is it this much? Is it this much? Is this much? What work still needs to be done and what questions remain? So that's going to be topic number one, and that's going to be a fun conversation for me, and I hope that you guys enjoy it as well. Topic number two, we're going to talk about the D-line. We're going to kind of talk about the state of the D-line. We talked about how we're going to have these different segments on the positions as we work through, and we did quarterback already, and next we're going to go to the defensive line, and then we're going to talk about the present of the defensive line and what my expectations are for 2024, and I think it's going to be a very, very good defensive line. But then we're also talking about the future, because I think the future is a little bit murkier than the present when it comes to the defensive line, and not your typical, well, the future is always murkier because it's the known versus the unknowns, but it's the future's murkier because there's some legitimate questions about the future of the defensive line for a lot of different reasons. And so I'm going to dive into that as well. And then part three, we're going to talk about 2026 quarterbacks. And I'm going to talk about just my overall opinion on the two quarterbacks on the board, what I think Notre Dame should do when it comes to 2026 quarterback recruiting, what it means for Notre Dame. And then we're going to dive into some film, because Tuesday, a reminder, is our film room day. And that's going to be sort of the final segment of at the end of every Tuesday show is going to be film room. And that's something that I plan on continuing throughout the season. It'll be different types of things, but during the offseason, there'll be a lot of recruiting. During the season, it might be a little bit different. But we are going to dive into that today. So you guys know, anytime I'm going to talk quarterbacks, I always get a little bit fired up. But the D-line topic is also one that interests me. And then also the discussion about closing the gap is always a fun off-season conversation. It's not something we've talked about in a while. So I thought it was a good time to reevaluate, reassess, talk about where Notre Dame has closed the gap, where they still need to, and all those type of things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As always, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and make sure that you are part of the message board, because that's where some of these ideas come from. I'm going to try to do more of that moving forward. There's always things that I want to talk about. I mean, I could talk about 8 different topics every day. You guys know me. I like to talk. I have a lot of opinions. There's a lot of things I want to talk about. But what I'm trying to do, and what I think we can do a better job of now at Irish Breakdown, because we are, kind of transitioning to more segments instead of just long a topic that goes for an hour and a half, and then we dive into a long mailbag. We're just going to do more topical stuff, more segmented stuff, and have a lot of different segments. And so I think one of the ideas that we plan to do is, look, if there's something that's really interesting on the board and creating discussion, or even if it's just something that I find interesting that I hadn't really thought about, I'm going to start turning those into different segments. And so today, we're on the board, and one of the questions was about closing the gap. And so that's where today's segment comes from, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So that'll be segment 1, D-line, segment 2, film room, and segment 3. And so that's going to be the plan of attack here for today. So let's dive into segment number 1, and this is about closing the gap, and obviously this is a segment we always talk about, right? And this is something that is going to be a topic of conversation until Notre Dame has actually done so. And this was brought up today by a user on the Irish Breakdown board whose username is 12IrishNC. So when a topic comes from somebody else, I want to give credit where credit is due, and he kind of brought it up today. And so there's a part of what he discussed about gap closing that I'll get into. And because I don't think it's quite as uh, I think there's a lot more depth to the conversation. And essentially, what the comment was, Notre Dame needs to start dominating big games to really make a difference. And if you dominate big games, then you close the recruiting gap. And my answer to that was simply, well, you've got to close the recruiting gap before you can win those big games, right? I mean, Vanderbilt's not going to go out there and start beating Alabama, LSU, and Georgia regularly, right? Because they don't have good enough players. So you've got to get your roster to a certain level where that can start to happen. And then when that happens, then you can start taking that next jump and start getting better and better players. And so, that's what we're going to talk about. And what we're not going to do, okay, so there's a particular fellow in the chat who knows who I'm talking about and looking at. We're not going to base this off of opinions of other people. We're going to actually talk about data and we're about our opinion, because this is not a place where we just buy into the narrative blindly, okay? But this is also not a place where we're going to spin it and make you feel like it's sunshine and rainbows all the time about Notre Dame. So when you talk about closing the gap, it really comes down to where does Notre Dame have to get to as a program? And this is holistically on and off the field. Where does Notre Dame have to get to the point where they are a team that we look at regularly as a title contender? Now, that doesn't mean they're going to win it every year. That's never been the case. It's about where you look at every year, you kind of view Notre Dame as that team that to keep an eye on, right? Like right now, you think about every year for the last 10 years, Bama's going to be in that conversation when the season starts. Ohio State's usually in that conversation when the season starts. Clemson has for a long time been in that conversation. Not so much this year, but for a long time, they were in that conversation. You look at teams like that are coming on a lot more lately. Georgia's actually for the most part been along those lines for a long time, because there were some really good Mark Richt teams that were in that conversation. But that's where Notre Dame is trying to get to. There was a time in the 2000s where every year USC was that team. There was a time when Oklahoma was that team. Now people think that Texas is going to be that team. So what does Notre Dame have to do to be that team that every year you think of, that team's got a shot to make a run at a title and goes out and makes noise every year? So it's not like that team that's ranked in the top 10 every year and never finishes there like Texas A&M, but a team that actually ranks high. This was a beef that I had with Michigan for a long time. It seemed like every year under Jim Harbaugh, Michigan was getting all this preseason hype, and they never lived up to expectations. Well, guess what? Harbaugh built the program to the point where the last 3 years, they've started to live up to that, where they have been a team that has gone on to make a lot of noise and be successful, including some years where I didn't actually think that they were going to be as good as they ended up being. So that's kind of where it gets to. And then at some point in time, you've got to win a title, right? I mean, you haven't really closed the gap until you've actually won a championship. But what closing the gap is not, in my opinion, is just winning a title and then going back to being mediocre. Like, to me, Auburn didn't close the gap in 2010. They had a magical season. What did they do after that? I think they went within 2 years, their head coach was fired, right? Because 2010, they played for the title. But in 2013, when they played and won the title, in the 2013, when they played for the title again, it was with a new football coach. Not because the old coach had left for a better job, because he'd gotten fired. So between 2010 and 2013, their coach had been fired. And then since that 2013 season, Auburn's had some years here and there, but they've never really been a team that you thought of, oh, gee, that team can win it. So there are teams that can have that sort of magical season. But what I'm referring to are teams that go out there on a regular basis and you look at and say, that team has a chance to win it, and then they back it up by, in Notre Dame's case, making deep runs into the playoffs. Like, to me, this is how it should look for me. This is what closing the gap looks like for me. In a 5-year period, Notre Dame should win a title once, play for a title once more, make it to a semifinal game one other time, and at least a quarterfinal in the other game, and honestly should be a playoff team every year. Honestly, you should look at it and say they should be in the quarterfinals twice, semifinals once, championship game twice. You got to win one. I would be okay if there's that season where you're very young and you've got a tough schedule and you go 10-2, you don't make the playoff, you maybe go 9-3, you don't make the playoff, you're really young, you go to a New Year's Six game or a big bowl game and you have a big win, you finish 10-3, and then the next year you're right back on track. That's going to happen to most teams. The Alabama runs of never being down, that's hard to repeat. And it's hard for Notre Dame to repeat that as well. But in a 5-year stretch, that's kind of what I think the expectation should be for Notre Dame as far as where they can be as a program. And if anything beyond that, then obviously is gravy. But that's where I think Notre Dame should be if they have truly closed the gap. Is they're that kind of team. But every year in those 5 years, every year you look at them and say, that team's dangerous. That's a team to watch out for. So that's what closing the gap looks like. Now the question is how close is Notre Dame to that, and what work needs to be done to get to that point? So we're going to break this down into kind of a few different topics, like of where they're at. Number one is going to be where I believe Notre Dame has shown progress. There's two areas where I think Notre Dame has closed the gap, and we'll actually get into that in a later segment. But the first one is going to be progress. Where has Notre Dame showed progress? And then I'll get into kind of what are some of the areas where you need to maintain, right? That'll be second, because there are some areas where you've had some success there. And then some areas where I have questions, or where there's work to do to continue closing the gap. Now, this isn't just going to be, okay, we're going to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver. We will have some of that conversation. But as I said, this is holistic. So this is also as much about the institution, the football coaching staff, the support they get, the facilities, all those type of things factor into it, as well as where is your roster? End of the day, the roster is the primary driver, right? And do you have the resources in place from a coaching standpoint to drive that roster and get it to the point where you're getting the most out of it? So, but there are things that lead to that, right? And commitment to the program has got to be one of those things. If you are an institution that does not show support for your football program the way that Georgia does, the way that Alabama does, the way that Ohio State does, and then you're not going to be successful. And what I mean by support, I don't mean you have to match them dollar for dollar. I don't mean if they build a slide in their football facility, you've got to build a slide. If they build a swimming pool for their football players, you've got to build a swimming pool. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about creating things, the best facilities possible, the best aspects possible for you to say, hey, we're getting the most out of our football program, and we're maximizing our players' development on and off the field because of these resources. Having a really cool arcade in your players' lounge is not going to close the gap. It might be something the players like and it makes them comfortable, but you're not beating Georgia because you had, Pac-Man and Galaga in your players' lounge, right? It's the other aspects. Do you have a top-notch training facility? Do you have a top-notch strength conditioning program? Do you have a top-notch nutrition program and all the things that includes? Are you maximizing your ability to have a top coaching staff? Are you doing all those type of things to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to be there? And here's the thing. 2 years ago, I would have said the Notre Dame as an institution has a lot of work to do in order to show the kind of true commitment needed for them to get to this point. But as you evaluate where they're at, I think that is now an area where we've seen major progress, especially over the last year. The last year has really shooken things up in this regard because you've seen some major changes. Now, part of commitment is money. Let's be honest about that. It's not just about throwing money at the program and saying, we're spending X amount of dollars, but say, are we willing to spend the money on these very important aspects that are needed for the football program to go out and be the best that it can be? And when you look at Notre Dame, what's something that for those of you that have been following me for a while or have listened to me for a while or read my writings for a while and you go back to the beginning, you know that I've been very hard on the Notre Dame administration for its lack of support for the football program. I'll praise them in some of the areas where they've done well, but there's just too many areas where they weren't showing enough support. And that included the head football coach not doing enough at those times as well. Well, when you look at the last year, and really the last several years, when you talk about the indoor facility, that really kind of kicked things off. Like the stadium upgrades were cool and they were nice, and I liked all those type of things. But they're just not really things that I look at and say, okay, yeah, that's cool. That helps with recruiting. That's helped with aesthetics, but you're not winning football games because you did the Crossroads project. I don't believe that has any impact on winning football games. It's good. It's not a negative, but it's not something that all of a sudden you're going to go beat this team because of this environment. People complain about, oh, Notre Dame doesn't have a very loud environment. And I would say, well, there's some reasons why that's true. And some of those are outside the football program's control. But I've been at some games in the last 10 years that were very, very loud. Why? Big time opponent. Notre Dame played big time football. I mean, the beginning of, for those of you who are there, you can attest to this. The first quarter of the USC game this year was incredibly loud because it was a big time game, night game, two top 10 teams, undefeated USC, one lost Notre Dame, or two lost Notre Dame coming off of a loss, two ranked opponents, not two top 10 teams, but two ranked opponents. Notre Dame is scrambling. They've lost 2 of 3. They're fighting for their lives. Top 10 team, undefeated team, rival comes into town, reigning Heisman Trophy winner, kicked your butt a year ago in the Coliseum, and Notre Dame came out, jumped all over them, and the place was going crazy. Right. I remember being at the Texas game in 2015, and they were just starting kind of the renovations for the Crossroad Project. And Malik comes out early, and I can't remember, like, they took one drive down the field and scored, and then Malik hits a bomb to Will Fuller, and the place is just going crazy. Jalen Smith has some big time plays, and the place was really loud. If you want to have a louder crowd, put a better product on the field. That's step number one. Now, there's other things they can do to try to limit selling tickets and all that, but the product has really got to be there. The commitment that to me matters is more so what you're doing for the day-to-day stuff for the football program. The indoor facility was big, in my opinion. That was step one. And now you've got the renovations to the Goog. I've been told it's between $100 and $200 million. What I'm told is the total cost is going to be much, much closer to $200 million. That's a huge investment that you're making. Brand new facility, state-of-the-art inside stuff. I mean, state-of-the-art strength programs. They're going to have a place to prepare food for players and places to eat for student athletes and all that kind of stuff. A lot of cool stuff happening there. That is far more practical to helping your football team be successful. It's not just about having a cool new building. It's about a building that's going to make it better for football players. There's some things I've heard that are going to be part of it that I don't want to mention because I don't know if that's for sure. There's a lot of rumors about these type of things, and so I'm not going to speak on certain things that I'm not 100% certain of that are going to be in there. But if the things that I'm hearing are going to be in there, you're looking at it saying, hey, this is big. This is impactful. This is important. This is going to make the football players have a better chance of being at their peak week to week to week. That's impactful. That matters. And so the school is making a commitment to that. Well, why? Well, I think there's multiple reasons why. One is, I've been told by a couple sources that I trust, one off campus, someone who's not at Notre Dame, and then someone that is at Notre Dame, that what you've seen in the last year, especially 6 to 8 months, is there has been a battle on campus for a long time. And the side of the people that believe that football success impacts overall success at Notre Dame are winning the conversation. And I don't know what turned the tide. I don't have a clue on that. I would love to find out someday. But that there's an understanding amongst leadership at Notre Dame now, whether it's new people, other people changing their views, that if you really want to maximize what the University of Notre Dame can be, financial power, academic power, all these things, the better your football team is, the more support and the more financial support, especially, that you're going to get. It creates a better environment on campus. These are just realities that there was leadership at Notre Dame a long time ago, and well, not even that long ago, that didn't quite understand this. They viewed the football team and the school as sort of like at odds, and you tolerate the football team because it made money. And there's other people that say, hey, look, we understand that if the football team is successful, that bleeds into everything else that we want to do. And so that's huge to hear that. And so that gets me a little bit fired up about the commitment as well. And then you're seeing them, it's one thing to say that, but then you see them putting the money towards it. What are some other things that we've seen the institution commit money to? Retaining coaches. There's coaches that had, I won't say who, but there was at least that I know of 2 assistant coaches on the current staff that had significant interest to go to other places for pretty substantial pay raises, and they turned them down immediately because Notre Dame had already stepped up and renegotiated their contract and paid them. That's never happened in my lifetime with an assistant coach that I know of. So, and I've been covering the team directly here, living here, covering it directly since 2010, and indirectly, covering it from the outside at other, for other places since 2007. I've never heard of Notre Dame reaching out, or not reaching out, the head coach is part of it, but like giving big pay raises to assistant coaches without there being interest from other people. That's big. That's big. And so you ask yourself, well, why are they doing this? Well, number one is what I stated. There's a greater commitment to we need this thing to be good as it can be. And that's huge. Getting that type of support on campus. And it's not because Jack Swarbrick's leaving and Pete Bavach was coming. I can assure you of that. Some of these things are things Jack Swarbrick's been fighting for quite some time that are now he now has more support on campus. And now Pete Bavach was walking to a situation where a lot of the battles that Jack Swarbrick fought, now Pete Bavach comes in and your expectation is to take it to another level and build on the foundation that Jack Swarbrick laid. That's important because you have to get that support. But you also have had some things happen in the last year that have also given the institution more resources. And what I like is, and I try to run my business this way as best I can, but when you get a big revenue boost, there's one of two things you can do with it. One is you can just say, okay, I'm going to put in the bank and let it collect interest and, get ready to make sure that when I die, I have a lot of money that I can't take with me. Right. Or you can say, hey, I'm going to take some of this. I'm going to save it. I'm going to, put it over here and save it and be responsible. I'm going to take some of it and invest it over here in certain parts of, but then I'm going to take the other parts of it and I'm going to reinvest it into the thing that made this money in the first place to try to make it better, to try to make it even more profitable. And so and not because I believe that return on that investment is going to create a lot better, a lot more. I know, right? USMA collect interest nowadays. I'm with you, man. But generally speaking, so Notre Dame goes out and they get the new Under Armour deal, which adds revenue into the athletic department, into the football program. And then they sign the extension with NBC. That was the second big shoe to drop. Now, as I said before, we don't know particulars. I have been told it's over 50. I have been told it's closer to 60 than it is 50 by another source that I trust very much. When you look at the deal that they get, let's just say it's 50, just for the sake of argument. And we've talked about this before, so I'll be quick. You're getting minimum 15 to 18 from the ACC. You're getting now, let's just say 50 from NBC. You went from being about a $25 to $30 million per year TV revenue operation, and you were getting, I think it was a million or a couple $1,000,000 from the college football playoff. You're looking at a situation where you were 30 to 35 at the most in TV revenue on a given year. Now you're talking about a situation where Notre Dame is going to be almost double that just on TV revenue with NBC and the ACC. Then on top of that, Notre Dame gets this new really nice deal as part of the college football playoff, where I believe the number, and I know some of you have actually figured this out, but I believe the number is somewhere around $13 million a year that they're going to get as part of the college football playoff. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. What some people are going to think is that's what they make when they get into the playoff. That's not accurate. If Notre Dame goes 4-8 next year, they get that number. That's the number they get. So now you're talking about potentially having Notre Dame being over $70 million now in revenue in TV and playoff revenue compared to 30 to 35 in previous years. That's a big jump. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars. It can kind of all seem a little bit, okay, it's millions or millions, but let's look at percentages. You're talking about doubling, right? You're talking about having a double, like your 100% growth. Is that what that would be, right? So you're making 35 and now you're making 70. I believe that would be 100% growth because 50% growth would be 15 of 30, correct? I believe that's accurate. But you've doubled your money just like that in 1 year. And so what you're seeing the school do is say, hey, look, obviously some of this money is going to be used for other aspects of campus, and that's what Notre Dame does, and that's what they should do. But a bigger chunk of that, from what I can see, is being reinvested into the Notre Dame football program. And to me, that is huge. And it's another thing that shows support. So when you want to talk about closing the gap, and you want to talk about resources and facilities and all that kind of stuff, that it has to start there, because at the end of the day, you could have great coaching staff, and Marcus Freeman could be the greatest coach ever to come to Notre Dame since Lou Holtz was here or Eric Parsegian was here, however far you want to go back. But if you don't get the support from the administration, there's going to be a cap on it, especially today. This is a whole different game than Eric Parsegian was the head coach of Notre Dame. Whole different game. You have to have that support. And from everything we can tell so far, Notre Dame is getting that. So that's number one, where they're showing progress. Number two is I'm just going to put this holistically coaching. Coaching is getting better. Has it closed the gap? No. Is it closing the gap? I think that's an absolute yes. Now, Marcus Freeman is still a bit of an unknown in this regard to can he win the big games and things along those lines. But even with Marcus Freeman, we've seen growth in certain areas, which I'll get into here down below. But one of those things is the staff that he's put together. And that means several things. Number one is when it comes to coaching is obviously do you have more support from the school to pay your coaches? Talked about that. The second part is can you have good retention with your coaching staff? Talked about that. Notre Dame lost Chris O'Leary this offseason. They lost Chancey Stuckey this offseason. So one move, you decided to get rid of somebody. The other one is you lost somebody. And it was a great opportunity for Chris O'Leary. He did a really nice job at Notre Dame as a safeties coach. Recruiting was starting to come along, and that's a loss. You can't deny that that's a loss. But you kept the rest of your staff intact, and you had a great plan of succession for the defensive side of the ball once O'Leary left. I mean, I heard some names being floated around about the DB, but the thing that I heard from all my sources right away was like, no, they're going to just promote Max Bola because that was a way to kind of give Mike Mickens more responsibility, which means bigger pay. Also take advantage of Mike Mickens' great talent as a developer and teacher. And then now Max Bola, you get to keep because I don't know that Notre Dame has any chance of keeping Max Bola if they don't hire him as a full-time assistant because he was getting a lot of attention from what I'm told. As an assistant coach. So this was big for Notre Dame. And then your offensive staff, obviously Jared Parker leaves. So that was the third loss, but you keep Dylan McCullough, which is huge. You keep Joe Rudolph. So there's finally going to be some continuity on the O-line that had 3 different coaches in 3 seasons. And you kind of Gino Guidugli is the quarterback's coach. So he now goes into year 2. So there's going to be some level of continuity. Okay. Then you get into adding coaches. Okay, you're going to lose coaches. Bama loses coaches. Ohio State loses coaches. Georgia loses coaches. Everybody loses coaches. But what do you do about it when you lose them? Do you replace them with even better coaches? That's the key. And so when you look at the defensive side of the ball, I'm not going to make a case that Notre Dame did better, losing Chris O'Leary because I think that would come across as disrespectful. I think Chris O'Leary did some very nice things in Notre Dame. But what I think they were able to do was make sure that it wasn't a step back. Now, is Max Bola going to be able to do for the linebackers what Chris O'Leary did for the safeties? That's a question mark. Is Mike Mickens going to be able to do for the entire secondary what he did for the cornerbacks? That's a question mark. I'm confident in those things, but it's still, you got to prove it, right? I mean, we can all be as confident as we want in Mike Mickens that he can do that, but it's not something he's done before. So we'll have to see it. But I think the plan was strong. Keep these guys in place. Let's have some continuity. Marty Biaggi knows these players. He can be involved. We'll have GAs involved. All that stuff looks good. And then offensively, you upgraded, pure upgrades. And you get rid of Chancey Stuckey. We don't need to rehash that disaster of the last 2 years. And you replace him with Mike Brown. Some questions about Mike Brown as a recruiter. It's early, and so that's why it's a question because we don't know. But we do have a very strong track record as a position coach, and he's worked with your new offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock. I like Jared Parker. I think Jared Parker had potential as an offensive coordinator. He did some good things this year. Notre Dame set a record in points, second best yards per play average since the end of World War II, behind only the 1 year from 2015 from Mike Denbrock. But there were also some flaws. There were some holes. There was some learning that needed to be done. There were some big game situations where we didn't see him do what he needed to do. Simple as that. You can like a guy all you want, and I like Jared Parker. Got to know him a little bit, good dude. But the fact is you can look back and say, yeah, I like the guy. I think he has potential, but you didn't do a good enough job in this game. You made some coaching decisions that were not right in this game. You made some calls in that game that were just not right. You didn't have your team ready to play in this other game. There was too much of that. And you needed to have, in my opinion, a little bit more certainty. And with Mike Denbrock, you get more certainty. We know that Mike Denbrock can develop the different offense. With Jared Parker, if you didn't like Jared Parker, you never thought he was going to be good. If you did like Jared Parker, the conversation could only be, I think he can develop into a top coordinator. But he wasn't one. With Mike Denbrock, he is one. He is one. And so to me, I look at it and say, you went from a guy that maybe had some potential, but had a lot of learning to do, to a guy that is proven. He can win now. It's not a, well, can he? And it's not even, well, can Mike Denbrock put a top offense together at Notre Dame? We know he did it at Cincinnati. We know he did it at LSU. And my answer would be, yeah, because he did it at Notre Dame 2015. That's exactly what happened in 2015, is he put a big time offense on the field. And so that was a big upgrade. And it goes back to the first one. It was not cheap for Notre Dame to go get Mike Denbrock. You gave out Golden a big raise. I don't know what the particular numbers are from each position coach, but from if what I've been told by sources is true, you could probably count the number of teams that have higher paid coordinator tandem on one hand. It's probably where you're at. So you made an investment. So Notre Dame has shown, hey, we'll go get the best coaches. We'll do what we can to keep them as long as we possibly can. I think those are both great moves. So those are some of the off the field areas where I believe Notre Dame has closed the gap, and they're very important. They cannot be dismissed. If you don't have the success there, then there's a cap on how good you can be on the field, in my opinion, to a degree. And so that's where it's very good to see that Notre Dame has made some jumps in those areas. All right, let's get into the next part of areas where we've seen progress. And now this is going to be more player level. And number one, it begins at quarterback. Now, are there questions about, can the quarterback play turn into championship? Can the quarterback talent turn into championship production? That's still a question mark. I don't think anybody can. I don't care how big of a Riley Leonard supporter you are, and you all know that I think very highly of Riley Leonard. You have to be willing to say, but can he do it at Notre Dame? And that's a very fair thing to say. You can be as high as you want to be on Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr or Deuce Knight and say, I think that guy's capable of winning a championship here. And I think multiple of the guys I just mentioned are capable of doing that, but it hasn't been shown yet. So that's a part of it. But what you can say in the present, while admitting, yes, they need to show that they can play at this level, what you can't deny is that the talent in the quarterback room is as good as there is in college football, in my opinion. I'm going to do a top 10 list of quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, all that kind of stuff here this offseason. Vince and I are going to get into some of that this summer, getting into June and July as we get ready for the season. We're going to have some top 10 lists for college football. It's going to be a segment that we'll do throughout the offseason. And I may even do a couple on my own before we even get to June. Just depends on how fired up I am and how much research I can do. But what I can promise you this is that Notre Dame absolutely will be in the top 10. A year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they weren't sniffing the top 10 when it came to the talent of their quarterback room. And so now you look at it and say, you landed talent, and you showed that you can go out there and get impact players in the portal. Notre Dame has gotten 3 Power 5 starting quarterbacks in the portal in the last, 5 years? Jack Cohn and then Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard now these last 2 years. So I think to win a championship at Notre Dame, you have to have big-time quarterback play. To have big-time quarterback play, you need to upgrade the talent of your quarterback room and create a wider margin for error, injuries, guys not panning out, and they've certainly done that. We broke down the quarterback room last week. We don't need to spend too much time on it. But to me, there's no doubt that from a talent standpoint, that Notre Dame is absolutely closing the gap. Now, how quickly as a team they can actually close that gap and, gaps closed, they went out and competed for and won a title, that's going to be determined by how well this talent, how much production you can get from the talent, right? It's that potential versus production thing that I always talk about. The potential is as high as it's been since probably maybe 2014 even, but even then I still, as much as I love Everett Golson's talent, I was concerned about the fact he'd missed the previous year and those type of things, but the talent was enormous. I would even argue this talent is better and the excellent talent. Now it's about getting the production that matches the talent. That remains to be seen. I'm going to stay on offense for this next group. I don't think there's any doubt that Notre Dame has closed the gap at running back. And to the point where you're talking about having a running back that was one of I think the 5 best running backs in college football last year. The numbers certainly back that up for Audric Estime. You're talking about a team that isn't now relying on just one guy to carry the day. You're talking about a team that's now got depth of talent. So, you can lose a guy like Audric Estime and you're like, okay, they're going to be fine because you're replacing him with a lot of talent. And it's not Jeremiah Love better be good or they're going to be in trouble. And it's not, Jadarian Price better be good or they're in trouble. It's Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Jabron Payne, Keedron Young, Aeneas Williams. There's the depth there now. And they don't appear to be slowing down at all when it comes to this. So you're able to recruit top players again because you hired coaches that are good teachers and recruiters. And so I'm a big fan of all that kind of stuff. And so to me, this is a big one because this is one of those positions where you'd hear for a while that people would say, well, Notre Dame can't really recruit top players at that position. Well, they have, and they'll continue to do so. Now, where do they rank in the top 5, top 10? That I don't know yet. I've got to go look at some of the rooms. There are other teams like Ohio State and Penn State that I will rank ahead of Notre Dame's room right now because they have more proven talent. Would I trade Ohio State's room for Notre Dame's room on just God-given talent? Excuse me. I said they have more talent. They have more proven production than Notre Dame's group. Top to bottom, 1 to 5. Would I trade their depth chart for Notre Dame's depth chart? No, I wouldn't. If we're just talking talent, potential, upside, athleticism, all that. Ohio State's room, however, has got 2,000-yard running backs in it, and Notre Dame's running backs, I don't think, have rushed for 1,000 yards combined. If you're being honest, you have to give a big part of the evaluation to the proven production. Same thing with Penn State. They've got 2 running backs that are proven. So where does Notre Dame fit in that? We'll see. I'm going to crunch the numbers, do some analysis, and we'll have that this summer. But what I can confidently tell you is I'll be shocked if they're not in the top 10, and I'll be a little surprised if they're not sniffing the top 5 or inside the top 5, just because it's going to be based on our rank is going to be based on, depth, proven production, talent, versatility, all fit in the offense, all those type of things. They'll be a top 10 unit, and I think they could be in the conversation for top 5, and we'll see exactly where they fall. But the depth is important, and you've got game breakers now. You've got multiple game breakers now, not just one guy who's really fast, and if you can find a way to get him free, you're going to be all right. You've got multiple home run hitters at running back now for Notre Dame. You've got versatility at running back for Notre Dame. You don't just have one type of runner. You have multiple types of runners, which means you can go at teams a lot differently. And that's an offensive coordinator's dream, is to not only have talent at running back, but have running back talent that I can use in different ways and at times used together. Makes life very, very difficult on defensive coordinators. Couple areas where I also think Notre Dame is closing the gap. And this one is obvious for us. We'll go to the defensive side of the ball, and that's secondary. Now, for a while there, it was just corner. And since Mike Mickens has arrived, Notre Dame has very much been closing the gap. And the last 3 years, really, they've kicked the door down. And now they're not like, to me, when I look at Notre Dame, you guys tell me in the chat if you agree with this. I think we're going to mostly be on the same page. The last 2 years, Notre Dame's cornerback room has been top 10 in the country, minimum, both years. This past year, I would argue they were top 5. And I would argue that vehemently. Like, you better show me something. There's maybe a couple rooms that you could say were better or as good. You could argue Alabama's was better or as good. There's a couple that you could look at. But there's no way you're telling me this is not a top 3 to 5 cornerback tandem last year with Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart. They were outstanding. The numbers back it up. I mean, look at Notre Dame's secondary. Look at Notre Dame's pass defense last season. Despite the fact they were blowing teams out and had big leads and teams kind of had to throw, when you look at where Notre Dame ranked last year in pass defense, they were an elite defense. They ranked 3rd last year in passing yards allowed per game. They ranked 3rd last year in yards allowed per pass attempt. They tied with Michigan for 1st in fewest touchdown passes allowed. They had twice as many interceptions as they had touchdown passes allowed. They ranked number 1 in college football last year in lowest pass efficiency rating, and they ranked number 2 last year in college football in lowest completion percentage allowed. There's literally not a statistic when it comes to yards, when it comes to defensive pass game production, that you look at and say they weren't elite in that category, top 5. And then you say, well, okay, I've used this argument for Michigan, for example, where I say, yeah, Michigan had a great pass defense, but one thing that helped them is they didn't play a lot of teams that were really good at throwing the football. Well, when you look at Notre Dame, you can't really argue that. You can't look at Notre Dame and say, hey, they didn't play anybody that was good throwing the football. I mean, they played several teams that were good throwing the football. They played the best receiver in college football last year, who pretty good room, and held them in check, held them to one of their lowest productive production performances of the season. In 2 years, they kept Marvin Harrison under 100 yards. I don't mean 100 yards per game. I mean, they had in 2 games against Notre Dame, Marvin Harrison had less than 100 yards receiving. That's really good. They played against Riley Leonard last year. They played against the Louisville offense last year. Running the game, not as great. Stopping the pass, pretty good last season. They played against Caleb Williams in USC. So they played some teams that could throw the football. In 2022, Notre Dame was also still a pretty good pass defense in 2022, and ranked in the top 15 to 20 in a lot of different categories, despite playing against what I would call a very challenging schedule that year when it comes to Drake May, CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, Jaron Hall, Tanner McKee, Spencer Rattler, a lot of guys that just got drafted at quarterback Notre Dame has played against the last couple of years. So you've seen them do it against teams that can throw the football or that have talent. And then this year was great, as we saw them lose Benjamin Morrison for a game, and then Cam Hart gets hurt, I think in the first quarter against Pitt, and Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey step onto the field and just do the same exact thing. And that's where you start kind of getting excited, where like if Notre Dame loses Benjamin Morrison, let's say he doesn't play next year, just for argument's sake, does Notre Dame have a top 5 cornerback room? Nope. No, they don't. You can't argue that, because there's a lot of, there's talent, but it's unproven. Would I still argue that Notre Dame has a top 10 quarterback room if they lose Benjamin Morrison and he doesn't play in 2024? I would say yes. There's a lot of teams on Notre Dame's schedule, a lot, that would say, yeah, I'll take Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray as my starting corners. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll take you could give me your depth chart minus Benjamin Morrison, and we'll take that in a heartbeat. A lot of teams on Notre Dame's schedule would do that. A lot of teams ranked in the top 25 would be willing to do that. So it's not just that they kind of got lucky with that 1-2 punch of Cam Hart, who moved from receiver. You didn't even recruit him as a DB. You went and found this sleeper from Arizona that nobody had ever heard of, which is not true. I mean, Alabama wanted him. Jimmy Lake wanted him. Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens wanted him. But the recruiting services didn't want him. He wasn't a top 300 recruit by anybody. One of the services had him ranked as a 3-star. And he comes out and he's one of the 5 best corners in college football. Well, okay, that's pretty good. You got lucky, you could argue. You hit that one magical home run like you did with Will Fuller, where you got a guy that nobody thought was going to be that dynamic player, and he turned out to be that dynamic player. That would be fair if that was the case. But you followed it up with Christian Gray and Micah Bell. Now, Micah Bell has since transferred because he was struggling to get on the field. Christian Gray, top 100 recruit. You beat LSU. You beat Ohio State for him. You go out the next year, you get Carson Hobbs and Leonard Moore. I'm very high on Leonard Moore. Then you go out the next year and you get Creed Thomas to kick things off. And then you land Dallas Golden, who's a big-time player, and they're on the verge of potentially getting another big-time cornerback pickup here soon as well. So it's not just that you had that one great year and now you're riding that, but Notre Dame is putting itself in position to continue this trend year after year after year after year. And they're doing it the right way. When there's a highly ranked guy that's a big-time player, that's a top 100 guy that fits what they're trying to do, like a Christian Gray, like a Dallas Golden, then they go get that guy. But they're not just beholden to the rankings. They're also saying, hey, look, I don't care what you say about Leonard Moore or Benjamin Morrison. We evaluate him as a certain way, and we're going to take him no matter what you think about him. And I think that part is important as well. So you have the evaluation, but you also have the coach there that can develop it. And it just goes to show how important it is. Yes, recruiting matters. There's no doubt. But if the development doesn't match to what, like Irish Scorty not saying, scouting, recruiting, development, I think you nailed it. You have to be able to scout well. Then you have to recruit and land those players. And then you've got to develop it. If you don't have one of those 3 things, you're not going to maximize your potential as a program. So IGK, that's a great point you just made. And Mike Mickens, his comment was Mickens is the complete package. And I completely agree. Evaluation is great, recruiting is great, and the development is great. And that's going to allow you to succeed at a position for a long time that most Notre Dame fans felt like just be good enough. And you had that, you had the occasional great years. You think of like the 02 with Vontaze Duff and Shane Walton. You kind of you look at the 2000, what would it be, the 2000 10 unit was pretty good with Darren Walls and Robert Blanton and Gary Gray, and then you had the 2015 duo of Kavari Russell and Cole Luke, which were very good, ruined a bit by Brian Van Gorder, but very good. You had the 2018 tandem of Julian Love and Troy Pride, which was excellent. But then there was always like the year before, the year after, or somewhere around there, it just wasn't as good. Now you're talking about you're stringing it together. You're not putting those things together. And to me, I think that's a position where you've said, okay, you went from it being a major question mark. I mean, think about this, folks. In 2020, 5 seasons ago now, so 4 seasons before this, 2021, 22, 23. So 4 seasons before this year, Notre Dame went into the college football playoff against Alabama with Nick McLeod, an undrafted free agent, and Clarence Lewis as your starting corners. Now, I like Nick McLeod, and he did great things for Notre Dame that year. If he doesn't come to Notre Dame, they're probably not a playoff team. I truly believe that. He was that important to add because after him was very scary. If he doesn't come, you're in trouble at cornerback. And then you have Clarence Lewis as a true freshman. That was your starting cornerback group going into play Alabama, and Devontae Smith and John Mechie in that group. Mac Jones, a quarterback, Najee Harris. Fast forward just 4 seasons, and we're now sitting here in 2023, 3 seasons after that, and you're talking about Clarence Lewis, who was a starter on your last playoff team, can't get on the field at cornerback outside. Saw his numbers just dwindle his 4 years to the point where now he's transferring. And I'm happy for Clarence. I think Syracuse was a great fit for him. I'm happy for him, and I think that's going to work out well for him. And this isn't a knock on Clarence, but the reality is that's not a guy that you're going to have as a starting cornerback on a team that competes for a championship. And he went from being the starter on a team trying to win a championship to a player that basically was going to have a hard time getting on the field. That's how you turn a roster around. And that's exactly what Mike Mickens has done. And it's a position where a lot of us didn't feel like, I'll be honest, that's the one position I've argued for years. Oh, don't give me this. Notre Dame can't get kids here, can't get kids there. There's really 2 positions that I felt are going to be a struggle for Notre Dame to recruit with any consistency. I felt corner was one, and big Southern defensive tackles was another. They're like the really big kids because they, for whatever reason, they just don't want to go away from home. They just don't. Cornerback, you've answered that. Big Southern defensive tackles, you haven't been able to get those guys yet. You've almost got a couple here and there. Kid from North Carolina last year, but you haven't been able to land those guys. That's the last kind of remaining question mark. But cornerback, Notre Dame has shown that we can develop corners and that we can recruit corners and we can identify corners. And that's huge for Notre Dame to have done that. And then also what I think Notre Dame has closed the gap, and the gap is closed enormously at corner. Another position where the gap is closing quite a bit is linebacker depth. Now, the reason I don't say linebacker period is because when you're a team that in the last 12 years has produced 3 Butkus Award winners, you don't have a problem landing top linebackers. You're a team that also, on top of those 3 Butkus Award winners, also produced Drew Tranquill, a linebacker who's a starter in the NFL, has won a Super Bowl, has been a very good player, was a great player at Notre Dame, very good player in the NFL. You can produce linebackers. There's no question about that. You just had 2 linebackers get drafted this past year in the 3rd and 5th round. But it's one thing to have a talented guy that gets drafted and have the kind of depth of talent needed to say that you have one of the best rooms in the country. Now, does Notre Dame have one of the 5 best linebacker rooms in the country this year? No. Because if you're going to take all the things into consideration, there's a lot of unprovenness to this linebacker room. Have they closed the gap in a big way in regard to recruiting talent at linebacker consistently? Absolutely. And the reason that matters, here's why this matters and why I'm talking about it specifically. Because just landing one top linebacker is good, but it's limiting. And here's what I mean by that. If Notre Dame hadn't recruited depth at linebacker, could they have been able to move Josh Burnham to end? Could they have afforded to move Junior Talamaka to end? Now, I would argue that they shouldn't have moved Junior. They should have left him a linebacker. But Josh Burnham's got a chance to be a very good edge rusher. But if you don't recruit that position effectively and know that, hey, yeah, we love Josh and we like his future at linebacker, but we've got Drake Bowen coming down the pike. We've got Preston Zinner committed. You know, we've got Jalen Seed on the roster. We've got these other players. We've got Jaden Osbury committed. We've got these other guys coming down the pike. We can move Josh. And that afforded them the ability to move Josh. And you could do the same thing. There's a lot of different things that you can do as a football program when you recruit depth. And what they've done is they've been able to use linebacker depth to then plug holes at other positions. Because, like, where would the defensive end depth chart be right now for whatever your feelings are of Junior Tuihalamaka or Josh Burnham? Where would the depth chart be right now if they weren't on it at defensive end? It'd be very thin, very thin. So depth at linebacker is huge. They're the nickel position for 2024 is a bit of a question mark. You've got Jordan Clark, and then after that, I don't really know what you have. The two nickels coming into the offseason were Clarence Lewis and Micah Bell. Well, they've both transferred out. Part of the reason is because of the emergence of Jaden Osbury, who's a very unique athlete. So they're using him as sort of a hybrid player. I think he called it the Aztec on certain groups, but then he's playing basically a nickel type of position where, yes, he's going to rush and he's going to be a perimeter support player and he's going to do all those type of things that a linebacker does, but they're going to ask him to cover in ways you don't normally ask a linebacker to do. Well, so you were able to tap into the linebacker depth chart to fill a need over here, and that's important, and they've certainly closed the gap. Now, proven production has to get better. Impact talent that is on the field has to get better. And so there's still room to grow, but that's an area where they have to get better. And Adam Dowling, just real quick in the chat, there's a reason why Notre Dame didn't go after that player that you mentioned who was right down the street. And it wasn't because he didn't have good film. But you can't recruit everybody. I understand where you're coming from, and there's some Northern kids they got to get, and we'll get into that. But there's a reason that guy didn't come to Notre Dame. So linebacker depth is an important one. So a couple areas where Notre Dame's got to maintain, right? Close the gap in some areas, but what you can't do, and this is what happens to some teams, what you can't do is close the gap in one area and then fade in another. 2012, 2011, 2010, I felt that Notre Dame was in a position where their defense was good enough to win a lot of football games that they didn't win because the offense wasn't good enough. And then all of a sudden the offense gets really good in 2015, early 2014, and then all of a sudden the defense falters. And it's always been this like back and forth where when the offense is really good, the defense is falters. Run game is really good, the pass game stinks. The pass game is really good, the run game falters. They've never been able to put it all together. And part of that is because there was just the inconsistency at certain positions. You'd be really good here one year and then not the next. So there are areas where Notre Dame is the gap setter, in my opinion, or at least in that top group already. They've got to maintain offensive line, tight end. And both right now, I'm confident in. I like where Notre Dame is at. Offensive line, there's still some questions that Joe Rudolph has to answer from a coaching standpoint. Is he a championship caliber coach? We'll find out. I don't know the answer to that yet. The other question I had about him was, can he recruit to the level you need to recruit to at Notre Dame to build an elite line? It's nice to go get the projects and the under recruited players. You're going to find the Joe Waltz every now and then. That was a great evaluation by Jeff Quinn and the staff. But you can't rely on only those type of guys, right? You need to be able to go out and get top talent. I don't care where it's ranked. I just mean top talent. We all knew Ronnie Stanley was a top talent, even though he wasn't ranked in anybody's top 100. What I'm referring to is, can you beat teams for the top talent? Since he's been here, he landed Styles Prescott, Peter Jones, who were guys that Harry had done most of the legwork with, goes out and finds Anthony Knapp, and then does a great job landing Gerby Lambert. Now, Coach Easton laid the foundation, but it was not going to be easy to get him when other schools started getting involved, like Ohio State, some Penn State programs like that. Joe Rudolph got it done. Then you come into his second full cycle, and he goes out and gets Will Black, who's ranked as a top 250 player in my book. On three has him as a 5-star. I have him as more top 250 to 200 to 250 with a lot of upside. Same with Owen Striegebig, top 100 to 150 guy with a lot of upside. Matty Augustine, top 250-ish guy with a lot of upside. But the fits that you're looking for, right? Because you're recruiting for talent, and the talent is there. And then you look at 2026, and they're already in on some good players. So I like the direction that Joe Rudolph is taking things from a recruiting standpoint. He's building on some things Coach Easton did. A lot of tackle bodies. So that way, if you have to move guys to guard, you've got a lot of athleticism there. You've got length there. So I like what he's doing there. So the recruiting part, I'm not worried about. Now it's about go show that you can coach at a championship level. So that there's a need to maintain there. But I think that they're on a track there. And then tight end, I see no reason to believe that they're going to take a step back there. They had very good tight end play last year. They project to have very good tight end play in 2024. You've got Cooper Flanagan who'll be back in 25. You think that Eli Raridan will have a shot to be back in 25. Jack Larson's already showing some progress. You got James Flanagan committed in the 25 class, who's very, very good. Top 100 guy on my board. And then they're already after some really talented players in 2026. Those two positions, I believe, Notre Dame they've already closed the gap, and now it's just about maintain. And if you want to build on it, great. But, sometimes when you're already the best, I don't know that there's building to be done. You just got to make sure that nobody catches you. And that's what they're working on in those two positions, in my view. So to conclude, these are the areas to me where I look at and say, there's work to be done. Or I have questions about where this group is going. And the most interesting one to me is the defensive line. And I'm going to leave it here now as it's a question and then move on, because it's going to be something I discuss in the D-line breakdown, and I don't want to double talk it, right? So I'll get to that later. But D-line to me is a question mark, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint as to what part of the conversation will be. I think they have a chance to have the gap closed in 2024 if they can get a couple questions answered. But my concern is not so much 2024, but what comes beyond 2024. What happens when all the veterans leave? That's something that I'm going to discuss. Another position group that I think is and what I didn't talk about when I was talking about the secondary, I talked a lot about corners. In the couple of years ago, I would have said corner has closed the gap, but safety needs work. Safety play has been really good. It's been very well coached. I do think that's going to continue, but we've seen a jump in recruiting the last couple of years, and now heading into 25's class, that makes me say I think that they're making progress there. It hasn't completely closed the gap, but they're closing the gap. That's what it's about. Not gap closed, but are they closing the gap? When you have Xavier Watts do what he did this past season, you had Kyle Hamilton do what he did a couple years before that. You've got a Don Schuler and Ben Minnick and Luke Talich in one class, which is a good, solid class. Your next class, a little bit shaky, but you added a really talented player, Bronte Johnson. I like Kennedy Urlacher's potential. But now you've got a chance to really make some noise in the 25 class, and they're off to a great start. They've already got Ivan Taylor committed. He's a top 100 recruit, borderline top 50 on my board. If he just shows a little bit of progress in a couple areas in 2024 on the field, then he jumps easily into my top 50 category. I think it was like on a scale of over 600 points, he was like, again, off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure I'm accurate on this, I think 4 or 5 points away from being a top 50 guy on my grading scale. And then Ethan Long, who I like a lot as well, top 150 to 250 caliber player. And then Notre Dame has put themselves in a great position with a kid in the 25 class named Jadon Blair. I think you guys have heard that name before, a time or two. Maybe last week we talked a lot about him. But he's another player that I like a lot that Notre Dame is in a good position with. Now, they got to close with Jadon Blair, and they got to keep it rolling in 2026. But they're off to a really good start in 2026. There's a lot of traction with a lot of really good DBs. And I know we'll have some shows on this as we get into the offseason in the summer when we start really diving into the 2026 board. But there's some good names on the board, and Notre Dame's in a good early place. So I do think safety is progressing towards that. Gap's not closed, but they're closing it with the way that they've recruited. Now it's about continuing to develop it and get more consistency. But when in a 3-year span, you've recruited the way that they have recently, but then you've also produced a consensus All-American and a unanimous All-American at a position in a 3-year span, you're pretty good. Now it's about getting the pieces beside those top players. It's the key, and that's what Notre Dame's got to work on, and they are. And that's what I like. So when I look at that position, they are. Now let's get back to work to do. The one position on offense to me that I think still needs the most work from a recruiting standpoint, from a development standpoint, from a production standpoint, very, very clearly the receiver position is not there yet. And while they have made some strides in certain areas, it's still a big, big, big question mark with the program. I'm optimistic that they're trending in the right direction in some ways, but there's a lot of show me to wide receiver, a lot of show me at wide receiver. Now, what's the good news? Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate, really good receiver class. You lost some guys from the 23 class, but you still have Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and KK Smith. So that's a really good back-to-back haul. But then we go to 2025, and it's a little underwhelming. I'm very high on Elijah Burris. I know some people are not. I understand all that. We'll find out. Very high on Elijah Burris. Think he's got a lot of potential, but he needs to be your number 2, number 3 guy in a class, not your number 1. And right now, he's not only their number 1, he's their number 1 by a lot. And you look at the receiver recruiting, there's some good players on the board, but can they close? That's a question mark. With Mike Brown right now, I have no doubt that Mike Brown is going to develop the heck out of the wide receivers. No doubt. I've seen him do it at Cincinnati. I saw him do it in one season at Wisconsin. People that in the business that I trust, coaches in the business that I trust that are familiar with the work that he does, rave about him. So from a coaching standpoint, I have no concerns. They have moved the needle, closed the gap, if you will, when it comes to the quality of coaching that they're going to receive. That's important because we've seen years at Notre Dame in the last decade where they had big-time talent, but a below-average receivers coach, and so they didn't maximize the ability. Now they've got a coach that can maximize the talent, but can he recruit the type of high-level players that we've seen come through Notre Dame in past years? That's a question mark. And then finally, the production hasn't been there. There's been some years here and there. You had a couple years out of Will Fuller, and Miles Boykin had a nice year one year. Chase Claypool had a really good breakout final season. But since then, has the production really been what you need it to be? It hasn't. And what you also haven't seen at receiver is this is a group that has not stepped up when it matters most. This is a group that, by and large, has not played well in the biggest stages. Now, there's been a performance by a player here and there, but by and large, this is a position group that has not stepped up when it matters most. And that has to change. And now, do they need LSU's receiver room where they have 2 top 25 draft picks? No, they don't need that. But you have to get more talent, you have to get more depth, and you have to get production. I think there's a lot of potential in this group, but even the most pro receiver talent, current receiver talent guy has to be able to say there's a lot they have to prove. Now, what has me optimistic is that you do have a position, a coordinator that has proven he can go out there and recruit pretty good receivers. Now he's just got to show it here. If you can close on a Javon Boggs, a Tanook Hines, you start to answer some questions. But at the end of the day, you've got to close. Now, what do they got to do to get there? I mean, I see what you guys are saying. They've got to put a better offensive, and I agree with all that. They've got to put a better product on the field that'll help, all these type of things. But you've got to be able to identify and still recruit. And look, Mike Mickens started recruiting at a high level before the product on the field matched it. Can we agree on that? Right? So it's not just wait till the production is there and then they'll fix it. There has to be this notion of you've got to recruit better to then fix the problem to then recruit even better. Right? That's just the reality of it. The good news is the 23 and 24 classes are going to be there with the talent to say, look, Notre Dame, I don't want to hear any complaining from anyone around the Notre Dame program, whether it be players, coaches, analysts, fans, show hosts, website runners, anybody. I don't want to hear any complaining about that. They don't have enough talent to have a pretty good receiver room. Do they have LSU's top level talent? No. Do they have Bama 18, 19 level talent? No. No one's arguing that. But do they have enough talent to go out there and compete for? Do they have more talent, in my opinion, than what Michigan had last year? Yeah, they do. in my opinion. Now, do they have the proven production? Do they have the coaching? Do they have the mindset? That they don't have. That's got to get better. But when you've got Jay Greathouse, Cam Williams, Jordan Faison, K.K. Smith, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate in a 2-year span, and then you can go out and get Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison from the portal. Talent acquisition should not be a problem for you. Plus, here's the difference between Notre Dame and a lot of other schools. Notre Dame is always going to be better tight end than most places, which means they don't necessarily need their receivers to dominate the way that other schools need a receiver to dominate. A lot of schools have really good tight ends, but those guys are complementary players to their receiving core. At Notre Dame, they can have a top tight end, and the receivers can be somewhat complementary. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame needs receivers to step up and not only just be – and it's not even just, okay, they need another Will Fuller. That's not even what I'm talking about. I think with the way that Notre Dame can run the ball in a perfect world, the way that Notre Dame's program is built, their ability to run the ball up front with the talent they have at quarterback and the impact talent they have at tight end, they don't necessarily need one guy to step up and do what Michael Floyd did in 2011 or Golden Tate did in 2019 or what Will Fuller did in 14 and 15 or what Chase Claypool did in 19. If it happens, great. But I'm a believer that with the way that the offense is built, the team is built, they just need pretty good talent around. Spread the ball around. I think of Ohio State in 2014. Who was Ohio State's best receiver in 2014? Stephen Smith. Wasn't a high draft pick. No, they had Michael Thomas, but Michael Thomas wasn't Michael Thomas yet. You know what I mean? In 2014. But what Ohio State had was they had receivers that could make big plays, that complemented the run game. But here's the thing. Those receivers in 2014 stepped up when they needed to step up. They were money players. And we've seen that with teams where, yeah, they didn't have big-time production, but, man, that dude stepped up in big games. Hunter Renfrow never put up monster numbers like other guys on the roster did. But, man, he was money when it mattered. So, to me, if Notre Dame just has 4 or 5 pretty good receivers, not elite, 5-star, top 10 NFL draft pick guys, but just a bunch of second, third, and fourth round players, and you've got 3 or 4 or 5 of those guys, and then you've got an impact tight end, you can spread the ball around enough and be dynamic with the way that Notre Dame should be able to run the football and the way that they play defense. And that's really what the minimum of what they need to get to. And now if they get beyond that and they go out and get, they have a Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas combination like Mike Denbrock had at LSU last year with the way they run the ball, with the talent they'll have at tight end, and with what the kind of offensive line and running back they'll have and the defense they'll have, that's a team that's winning a championship. I mean, that's a team that's the favorite to win a championship. But they don't have to necessarily get there is my point. But they have to be better than what they've been. Recruiting has to be more consistent. Coaching has to be a lot better than what it has been. But the mindset has to get better. And what has been lacking from Notre Dame's receiving corps for years is that dog mindset of Kevin Austin, great talent. But where was he against Cincinnati? Where was he in some of the bigger moments? He didn't always step up the way you need him to step up. Now, I would argue part of it is his problems he had. I would argue other part of it is he wasn't really coached and developed the way he needed to be developed. So that matters too. But part of it is recruiting and then developing players that have that I'm that guy mentality, even if they're not elite players. Like somebody just mentioned Jeff Samardzija. Jeff Samardzija was not an elite talent the way that Golden Tate or Michael Floyd was, the way Julio Jones was. Now, don't get me wrong. He was talented. But Jeff Samardzija's production, in my opinion, was greater than his actual physical talent, but what he knew how to play. But Jeff Samardzija thought every time he got on the field, he was the baddest dude on the field and nobody could guard him. And then he'd go out and work like a guy that wanted to prove it. That's the key. You can think of anything. I think right now I could go out and run a 4.4. In my head, I can go out and run a 4.4. Well, do any of you think I can run a 4.4 if I went out and actually ran it? No, because I'd run a really terrible 40 time. So you can think something all you want, but then you got to go back it up. And that's what I loved about Jeff Samardzija. That's what I loved about Mo Stovall in 05. It's what I loved about Golden Tate in 09. It's what I loved about Michael Floyd. It's what I loved about Will Fuller. It wasn't just that they were talented, but they were like, get me the ball. Get me the ball when it matters because this dude can't guard me. And I don't know that Notre Dame has really had anybody like that. I mean, Chase Claypool was tremendously talented, but I don't know that I saw that from him against Georgia in 2019. You know, I don't know. So it's a mindset thing. The good news is I see that mindset in Jaden Greathouse. I see that mindset in Cam Williams. I started to see a little bit of that mindset this spring in Micah Gilbert. That's encouraging. That's very encouraging. So I think they're on their way, but there's way too much work to be done for me to say that they're there. And then there's really three other non-player related areas that there's still work to be done. Recruiting has taken big strides. Chad Bowden was best hire Marcus Freeman's made, in my opinion. And they're doing a great job, but there's still work to be done. You've got to start landing some more players that have that high level talent. That doesn't mean 5-star recruits. I don't care about that. I mean talented players, whether it's a Jadarian Price who's not highly ranked or a Jeremiah Love that is highly ranked, go get them, right? You need more of that. You need to look at some of the holes on the roster and say, okay, we've got to still do a better job recruiting here. D-line recruiting is going to be one. Those are things that you need to look at and say, we're getting better. We've closed the gap, but is there work to still be done? Absolutely. And that's something that I think the school can help them a little bit with, but it's primarily going to be on the football staff. Part of recruiting comes from the portal. The portal has been a positive for Notre Dame. There's no question it's been a positive for Notre Dame. But I do believe that the school can do a little bit more to work with the football team when it comes to undergraduates. Now, listen, folks, Notre Dame's not going to be taking very many junior transfers. They have Bo Collins, right? Riley Leonard. They're getting closer to that, but those are guys that were on pace to graduate. They're not going to be getting a lot of guys that are halfway towards their degree and are going to come to Notre Dame. It's just, you're not going to see a lot of that. But there are some things that they need to be able to do to say, hey, if there's a guy or two that you really need and he's got this, he's got that, we'll work with you on it. And that's going to be something that there can still be progress there. So I think those are aspects. And then here's the last one. Here's the last one for me. What do all these ingredients equal? What is commitment from the institution? Good coaching, improved quarterback play, secondary, linebacker, running back, O-line, tight end, receiver, recruiting, portal. What does all this mean? What's the end game? What's the end result? It's winning. It's winning big games. It's winning championships. And right now, Notre Dame has clearly closed the gap in the last 6 or 7 years. And it began before Marcus Freeman in some ways. You're talking about a team that from 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, in the last 7 years, they've had 6 years of 10 or more wins. They've made 2 playoff berths since 2018, right? I mean, those are all important things. That's closing the gap. But it's small jumps because the one thing that has still not been proven that Notre Dame can do consistently is win the big game. They have not shown that they're a team that needs to be feared. When Alabama was at its height, when USC was at its height in the 2000s, when Notre Dame was at its height in late 80s, early 90s, you go back to any team, you're just that team. I saw it with Georgia the last couple of years. You're that team that when you'll win 7 games by showing up. And what I mean by that is there's just going to be games where the other team is just in their minds defeated before the game even starts. You are the baddest dude on the block. You are that team that people don't want to play. You're in their heads. And I mean, at least 7 games, you're just going to win by showing up. And there's going to be two or three other games you just win. You just got to play solid football and you're going to win because you're just that much better than that team and you're in their heads. But then there's those last couple games against teams that can kind of go toe-to-toe with you or that aren't afraid of you. And that's where Notre Dame right now is they're not there. What they showed this past season is that they took a step towards becoming that team that just goes out there and handles business against the inferior opponents. And they did. Notre Dame won 10 games last year. 9 of their 10 wins were by at least 21 points, right? I always forget the numbers. At 20 or it's 21 because if you look at last year, they won games by 39, 53, 21, 24, 7, 28, 51, 38, 33, and 32. So 9 of their 10 wins were by 21 points or more. Guys, that hasn't happened in decades. decades that was anywhere close to that. I think it was the most they've ever had. I don't think they've ever had, because I looked this up at the end of the season. I think the most I saw going back the last 50, 60 years was like 6 or 7. But to have 9 games decided by 3 touchdowns or more, that's dominance. That's a level of dominance that I don't even think we as Notre Dame fans appreciate. Because why do we not appreciate it? Can anybody in the chat answer that question? Why did Notre Dame did something that, per my research, they've never done, which is win more than 6 games. They won 9 games by 3 touchdowns or more, minimum. Why do we not appreciate it? They didn't beat anybody that they weren't supposed to beat. They're supposed to beat USC. That was not a great USC team. But they didn't beat Ohio State. They didn't beat Louisville on the road. They didn't beat Clemson on the road. They didn't win the big game. They had a great opportunity against Ohio State. They didn't, but they couldn't get it done. They had a great opportunity to beat Clemson on the road, take control of that series. We talked about going into the game. You had beaten Clemson the last 3 times you played. You got 2 wins over Clemson, right? You got a chance to go out there and take control of this series. You'd beaten them in 2020, then they beat you in 2020. Then you smacked them in the mouth in 2022. You had a chance to take control of that series. And they went out and got smacked by Clemson. That's why we don't care that they beat Pitt by 51. That's why we don't care that they beat Stanford by 33 and beat Wake Forest by 38. Because you're supposed to win those games. So the fact that they dominated at a level that we have never seen before, ever seen before, from a points per game average, the reason that we don't care as much about that is because it's Notre Dame. And fair or not, when you're at Notre Dame, you're supposed to win the big games. I would take not winning that many games by 21 points or more and beating Clemson and Ohio State than I would say, hey, what would you rather have? 9 wins of 21 points or more, but losses to Ohio State and Clemson? Or would you rather have 3 wins of 21 points or more, but beat Ohio State and Clemson? That's an obviously easy answer. This isn't a trick question. That's the final step for Marcus Freeman. Is he showed in 2022 that they can step up in some big moments, but it's been too inconsistent. I had somebody say this year, this is where the conversation started. And you're talking about gap closing, you got to win the big games. And then another question on the message board was talking about, does Notre Dame have issues with, playing on the road? And my answer to that was, I don't think they have issues playing on the road. I think they have certain issues playing in big moments. And I think that they have an issue just kind of showing up consistently, because you can look at and say, well, they didn't play well on the road against good teams in 2023. Fair, they didn't. Clemson was a big game and they didn't play well. Louisville was and Duke was, but they looked a lot like that team at home against Ohio State. Well, I'd point to 2022 and say, okay, well, that was a year you went on the road and smashed an undefeated North Carolina team that ended up playing in the ACC title game. You beat them by 21 points, and it wasn't that close. I mean, if Audric Estime doesn't fumble in the end zone and you don't give up 2 garbage touchdowns at the end of the game, you win that game by almost 50 against North Carolina in 2022. They smashed Clemson that year at home, but the week before that, they went on the road and beat a top 20 Syracuse team convincingly, just physically beat their butts the entire game. They went on the road against USC at the end of the year and played their butts off. USC was just better and Notre Dame was depleted, but they played their butts off. So I don't know that it's that they don't play well on the road. I think it's twofold. They don't consistently play well in big games, and Coach Freeman has not shown that he can mentally and emotionally get this team to have a certain standard. It's here, and then Stanford. Here, Marshall. Here, and then, Duke. And that's the thing that's been the issue is, can you be consistent, and then can you win the big games? That's going to be the final straw. Now, what I don't know is there really that type of team on the schedule in 2024? I think there will be. I think A&M is not a big game, but it's a big game. And I still think Florida State's going to be a really good team this year. USC on the road is going to be an opportunity, but that's what the playoff is for. They've got to go into the postseason and win a couple of those games, and not against you beat the Group of 5 champ in round 1 and you beat the Big 12 champ in round 2, and then you go play Georgia or Bama or Texas or Ohio State in the semis and get smacked. You got to start win. You got to start winning those games. And I don't want to hear like a, well, you got to the semis and you almost got it done. That's progress, but that's not the kind of gap closing that we need to see. That shouldn't be dismissed. That shouldn't be poo-pooed as like, failure. No, it's not a failure. You won 2 playoff games, got to the national semifinals. You were a top 4 team. That's not a failure. But you failed to live up to the ultimate standard. There's a difference. And you may think it's semantic. I don't, because a failure means like just no, you were not good. That's a failure. Failing to get to the pinnacle means, hey, you're getting closer, but you're not there yet. You made strides, but you're not there yet. Now go finish the deal. And that's where Notre Dame has got to get to. They've got to start winning some of those big games. They've got to start winning some of those having some of those big moments. They've got to start striking more fear into the hearts of those opponents to where I don't want to go to Notre Dame Stadium. That place is loud. That team is really good there. They feed off that crowd. They're just not a fun team to play. That's the difference. Notre Dame had crazy loud environments in in 88, 89, and 90, 91, 92, 93. They had 59,000 people in the stands. Why was the crowd so crazy? Because they loved the product. Even the games they lost, they had some terrible home losses under Lou Holtz. Stanford 1 year, Penn State another year, Air Force 1 year. Terrible home losses. But man, people still loved going to watch that team play. I've talked to so many people because you loved greatness, and those teams had some great years. You put a good product in the field, the fans will be there, especially when you play good teams. But you've got to put a better product on the field. They're making strides, no doubt. But until you can say, well, we almost beat Ohio State, but you didn't. We almost beat Georgia twice, but you didn't. We almost took control of the Clemson rivalry, but you didn't. We played Clemson tighter than Alabama did in 2018. Nobody cares. Well, we didn't lose to Alabama as bad as Ohio State did in 2020. Nobody cares. You're Notre Dame. You're supposed to win those games. And until they do that, the gap isn't closed. But I say this last because I do believe you can improve in all those areas we talked about to the point where you are capable of winning those games. And then when you win those games, that's when you take that next level from a recruiting standpoint. That's where you get a couple of those 2 or 3 extra guys. And I've argued this before. Getting to that level does not require Notre Dame to win 10 recruiting battles a year that they never won before. It's 2 or 3 a year that you've got to start winning that you didn't win in the past. And then you've got to have the staff in place to get the most out of those guys. That's the key. That's the key. And so, and We Are Not Marshall just made this point. The game last year against Ohio State came down to one thing. In the fourth quarter, their defensive end made 2 big plays. He made game-winning plays. Kyle McCord made money big throws. Their DB stepped up and made stops when they needed to make stops. And Notre Dame guys didn't. Kyle McCord made a great play on 4th and 7. Notre Dame's defense shouldn't have given that up. Kyle McCord made a great throw on 3rd and 19. Notre Dame's DB played that poorly. Should have never even been allowed to be completed. Notre Dame had a chance to ice that game with an interception. They couldn't get it done. You've had chances. 2019 against Georgia. You get the defense makes a big stop, forces a punt deep in Georgia's own territory. You get the ball at the 48-yard line with 2 minutes left, down 6, touchdown, and you have the upset of the year at Georgia. Didn't get done. So it doesn't matter that you almost did it. What matters is that you didn't. Georgia 2017, in the fourth quarter, Jake Fromm, Javon Wims, Terry Godwin in the second half of that game made game-winning plays. Notre Dame's guys did not. And that's that final step that Marcus Freeman's got to get this program to. Now, a lot of stuff I just mentioned didn't happen when he was here. But now he has to be the one that fixes that. Brian Kelly couldn't fix that. Marcus Freeman needs to fix that. And if they can get to that point, then that's why I'm excited for the future, because I see more commitment from the institution. I see upgrades in recruiting. I see more skilled talent. I see certain things being really good in the program. And I see this team close. I study other teams, and I'm like, that team's good, but they should not be beating Notre Dame. This team is good, but they should not be consistently better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame should be better than they are. And I think Coach Freeman's going to get them there. And that's something that I'm excited about. But now it's Now go do it, right? We talk about it all we want. Now go do it. So that's what I'm excited to see. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. I'm going to talk about D-line next. But before we do, folks, do me a favor. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. Give us a 5-star review, which we would also greatly appreciate. And if you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. The reason why is, number one, you're going to be part of a great community. You really will be. Number two, we put content on there that we don't put anywhere else. Number three, it supports Irish Breakdown. It supports what we're trying to do, what we're trying to build. There's a lot of different ways you can support. Like, people ask me all the time, how can we support you? Read all of our articles, listen to our shows, listen to our podcast, which you can find, subscribe to our podcast, download our podcast. Even if you don't always listen to it, as long as you download it and listen to at least a minute, you help us out and help us make more money and help us build up our ad base. And also supporting our Irish Breakdown Champions Lounge. You can sign up for a monthly membership, an annual membership. You can join the Gold Club, the Booster Club, the Blue Club, or the Shamrock Club. Or you can go to the IB store on the Irish Breakdown page, buy some merch that supports us, or you can just make a donation. Those are all ways that you can help Irish Breakdown grow and that we continue to grow our channel and provide even better content for you on every platform that we do. And you can find all of that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, let's get into part two of today's show. And we're going to talk about the Notre Dame defensive line. And this is going to be a very interesting conversation because this part of the team, to me, is probably the biggest. I love what it is now, but I'm not sure what it's going to be that Notre Dame has. And here's what I mean by this. And we're going to get into this because the whole point of this conversation is to kind of look at it and say, hey, where is Notre Dame as a program right now for 2024, but then also trying to look at it for the future. And when I look at Notre Dame's 2024 defensive line, I think it's got a chance to be really good. And I'm going to explain why. After I break that down, I'm going to explain why I have some concerns for the future. And I know I'm not the only one. And so we'll dive into that too. So, because maintaining is the key, right? When Notre Dame lost Harry Hiestand the first time, the offensive line went down and the team wasn't as good. Harry Hiestand comes back, things start trending back up. Now Joe Rudolph has to build on that, right? You've got to maintain where your strengths are. Right now, the Notre Dame defensive line, it was a strength for Notre Dame in 2023. And I know it wasn't a strength everywhere. There was issues at Viper, but when you look at the production and the play from the defensive line, and especially what they did in some of the bigger games, the defensive line, to me, played like a top defensive line last year. Go watch Ohio State game, and they were excellent. Go look at the Duke game. The team didn't play well. D-line played pretty flipping good in that game. Louisville was a little up and down. Clemson was a little up and down. USC, dominant. NC State, dominant. There was a lot of great moments from the D-line last year. Now, not every position, but as a whole, it's very, very good. And so a lot of that's coming back next year. You've got some new faces. So I think this defensive line has a chance to be one of the best. And I'm going to break down why. I'm going to explain to you kind of why I think this defensive line in 2024 has a chance to be a top 3 to 4 defensive line. And then what I like about it, and then what we need to see. So I'm going to pull up sort of the post-spring depth chart of the defensive line. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. We're going to start with the defensive end position. Actually, we're going to start with the defensive tackle position. Let's start with the strength. Let's go defensive tackle. So when I look at the defensive tackle position group, I think it's absolutely loaded. And I've seen some conversations about the depth and things like that. And there's some truth to that, but allow me to kind of explain what has me so fired up. Now, this is just scholarship players in the D tackle spot. I have not added any of the guys that will be arriving in the summer. This is just where it is post-spring. So you won't see Quentin Avery on here, who's a walk-on. He won't be part of this conversation. Same thing for the defensive end position. Actually, although defensive end-wise, all the high school kids are enrolled already. So you'll actually see a complete group from this one. But let's look at the defensive tackles. Number one, this is what's exciting is this is a position group that's been a problem for Notre Dame for years. And even a year where they had an All-American like Jerry Tillery, he was up and down, and the play outside of him was not overly impactful. Part of the reason Notre Dame's defensive line last year was so good was because your starting defensive tackles were top 5 in the country last year amongst all defensive tackle groups. And I think sometimes as Notre Dame fans, we tend to lose sight of how good we don't honestly lose sight. Let me think of a better way to put this. I don't think we always appreciate how good what Notre Dame has is because we don't watch enough of other teams, or we'll only watch a team once or twice. They play well, and we just assume that's always the case. And what I think gets missed with last year's Notre Dame defensive line is the fact that if you look at any metric, there's no doubt that Notre Dame's defensive line was part of what was a top-ranked defense. Notre Dame was a clear top 10 defense last year. That's not really debatable. It was a group that finished in the top 10 in scoring defense, top 10 in total defense, top 10 in yards per play, top 10 in red zone defense. There's a lot of categories where this defense was top 5 to 10. They were excellent. And a big part of that was the play of their defensive line. And so a big part of the play of the defensive line was how good the defensive tackles were. That was a big key. Now, I know that some people are more down on this group than I think they are. And that's because I think Riley Mills has become a little bit of a whipping boy for Notre Dame fans for some reason. And I don't quite understand that, but that's just the reality of it. He doesn't get enough credit for how good he was. Now, can Riley Mills get better? Absolutely. Does Riley Mills need to get better? Absolutely. But he did a lot of really good things last year. You pair him with Howard Cross, who had an exceptional year last year. And the numbers back it up, and the film backs it up. Howard Cross last year, second-team All-American. You look at the way he played, he was impactful in the run game. He was impactful in the pass game. His All-American honors were deserved. You know, sometimes guys can become – like, I felt this about Jerry Tillery. And I don't mean disrespect for Jerry Tillery. I think Jerry Tillery did some very good things at Notre Dame. But the reality is that, you know, he was a guy that had some really flashy moments that wasn't consistent. He wasn't a consistently dominant football player. And they need him to be a more consistently dominant football player. That was just the reality of it. And they didn't get it. But then the sidekick to him were nice quality depth players, but they weren't impact players. Last year, Howard Cross not only had some big flashy moments, but he was just consistently a really quality football player that also produced. But he had a partner in crime, so to speak, in Riley Mills. And again, the numbers back it up. If you want to look at pro football, number one, reputation-wise, you talk to any coaches that played Notre Dame, they'll tell you more. Those interior guys were really, really good. But then also you look at some of the grades. So I'm, very hard on Pro Football Focus, but you can't ignore the fact that last year their number 3 and number 11 defensive tackles last year were Notre Dame guys. Howard Cross finished 3rd, and Riley Mills finished 11th. Now this is minimum 100 snaps. I mean, so I didn't put the minimum snaps up very high because if you play like one game and you grade out really high, then they'll put you in there. So I'm trying to get guys that actually played. And give you that statistic because that's going to help you out. Because if you look at Notre Dame last year, I mean, I could tell you Boubacar Traore had a high grade and he played 5 games, only played 27 snaps all year. That would kind of skew things a little bit, in my opinion. But when you look at it and you look at the production they had, number 3 graded defensive tackle in Howard Cross, number 11 graded defensive tackle in Riley Mills when it comes to pass rush grade. Then you look at the numbers and you look at the total number of pressures. Last year amongst interior defensive linemen, Howard Cross finished 5th in pressures. Riley Mills finished 7th in pressures. That's all of last year. Now, here's the thing. Look at the list. Here's the top 10. Deion Walker, Brandon Dorless, Byron Murphy, Jerzon Newton, Howard Cross, Aeneas Peebles, Bear Alexander, Riley Mills, Devondre Sweat, Norrell Pollard. That's the top 10. Well, Murphy's gone. Newton's gone. Sweat's gone. So this is just top 10 last year, not just what's coming back. You look at right outside the top 10, you had Mason Graham and Michael Hall tied for 11. So Michigan's best defensive tackle last year, Mason Graham, had 29 pressures. Notre Dame's number 2 defensive tackle last year had 32. Now, here's if I'm all about being honest and fair. And the difference is for Michigan is Michigan had 3 guys that had a lot of pressures, right? So we have to be fair about that and say they had 3 guys. And so Notre Dame didn't split up the reps they did. So you had Mason Graham had 29 pressures. Kenneth Grant had 23 pressures. That's a total of 52. Riley Mills or Howard Cross had 39. And then they had Chris Jenkins, who had 20 pressures. So their 3 defensive tackles had 72 pressures. Notre Dame's top 2 guys, Howard Cross and Riley Mills, had, do the math, 39 plus 32, 71 pressures. Their top 2 guys in 13 games had 71 pressures. Michigan's top 3 guys had 72 combined, right? That's everybody says Michigan, hands down, best defensive tackle in the tandem in the country coming back next year. They may very well be. I don't really care if you say they're better than Notre Dame or Notre Dame's better than them. They're both outstanding. They're both outstanding, and that's what matters. That's run game production or pass game production. Let's look at run game production. So let's look at what Notre Dame had last year when it comes to run game production. And if you look at the overall grades for in production that they had last year in this regard, and you look at the total number of run stops, and you look at the guys coming back last year, the total number, this is all actually not even coming back. This is Power 5, excuse me. All Power 5 teams last year. Howard Cross finished number 2 in the country last year in tackles and run stops, according to Pro Football Focus. It's considered anything that's a win for the defense. Number 10, Riley Mills. Michigan had 1 guy in the top 10 last year. Now they had Chris Jenkins was top 10 and Mason Graham was number 14. And I believe Kenneth Grant was in that conversation as well. He was in there somewhere as well. But he was 41st. No, Rayshawn Benny was 41st. So again, the numbers are there. This isn't just my opinion. This is numbers. The numbers that they were in run game and pass game, Riley Mills and Howard Cross were a dynamic 1-2 punch. Let's give some more context. And this is sort of a counter against. I said this before. Notre Dame's defensive tackles last year played a lot of snaps. So when you talk about the production between Notre Dame's guys, Riley Mills and Howard Cross, and then you look at the production for Michigan guys, you have to also keep in mind that comes with each player individually played a lot less snaps. And so when you look at Notre Dame's defense last year, and you compare the number of snaps for Riley Mills and Howard Cross in 2 less games, they both played way more snaps than Michigan's guys. Howard Cross played 610 snaps, and Riley Mills played 535 snaps. That's a lot of snaps for defensive tackles. Why? Because Notre Dame's depth wasn't as good as what Michigan's was last year. When you look at Michigan's defensive interior, they had 3 guys that could rotate in part of that group, and really 4, because as I mentioned before, Rayshawn Benny was a pretty good player last year. And I think did he get hurt? No, he didn't get hurt. But he was a guy last year. So they had Mason Graham played 442 snaps. Kenneth Grant played 403 snaps. Chris Jenkins played 418 snaps. Cam Good played 267 snaps. Rayshawn Benny played 244 snaps. After Notre Dame's top 2 guys, the next most snaps for a Notre Dame defensive lineman was Jason Onye at 155, and then Gabriel Rubio at 150. Jason Onye was at 155, and Gabriel Rubio was at 136. There was a much greater burden put on Notre Dame's defensive tackles last year. Well, in fairness, that means you're going to have more production. So that has to be taken into consideration. So when I look at it, I would actually like to see a little less production or, on fewer snaps. But there's a chance you could get same level of production, but on fewer snaps, because the reality is the game has changed for Notre Dame in 2024. They can't have the same type of defensive tackle play that they had last year and expect it to be good enough in February when they get to the national championship game, in my opinion, or late January when they get to the national championship game. You did this last year in 13 games. You're now talking about 16 games. You can't have 2 defensive tackles in college dominate the reps the way that they did last year. So what's going to be key for Notre Dame in 2024, and why I'm excited about this group, is because the depth should be better. Because what's something that's missing from this group right here? You guys are looking. It's a pretty good group. Jason Onye, major breakout this spring. Donovan Heinisch had a really quality spring. Sean Sevillano gives him some beef. He had a nice spring. I liked what I saw from Devin Houston in limited snaps. I liked what I saw from Brendan Vernon in limited snaps. I don't know why the D-line coach doesn't like him as much as I do. He sees a lot more practice, so I don't want to get into that conversation. But what I know is when I saw him in the spring game, he showed me some things. Armo Mookum's very talented. He comes back. What's missing? There's no Gabriel Rubio because he's not on the team yet. This is post spring. If you add Gabriel Rubio, and I from everything I've heard, I expect him to come back. I haven't heard anything different, but we'll see. And nothing's official till it happens. But if you get Gabriel Rubio back, and with the breakout we saw from Jason Onye, the experience he got last year, Donovan Heinisch, Sean Sevillano, Brendan Vernon, Devin Houston, Armo Mookum, you now have some guys that, in my opinion, you can now rotate more. You don't have to give Howard Cross 50 snaps a game. You don't have to give Riley Mills 45, 50 snaps a game. You can now give those guys some breathers, especially against some of the, let's be honest, lesser opponents. So to me, as good as the defensive tackle starters were last year, the depth was okay, but it wasn't great. They need to be better after the top two guys. And that's what I think is going to tell the difference between if Notre Dame has a top 5 defensive tackle group or the best defensive tackle group or the second best defensive tackle group. It's not what Mills and Cross do. They're excellent. If we're just talking 2 for 2, they're in that conversation of the top 2 or 3. There's no debating that, in my opinion. If we're going to talk about who's got the best defensive tackle depth, meaning beyond the first 2, Notre Dame doesn't have a case to make there because the production behind the top 2, there was a big drop-off where Michigan had 4 guys that produced last year. Notre Dame had 2. That's the difference. So that's why if I was going to tell you who has the better defensive tackle starters, I would make a case for Notre Dame. If you're going to say, well, starters are fine, but what about the entire depth chart? Who has the better defensive tackle group when you go to play your games? Then you have to look at it and say, you can't argue for Notre Dame. You can't, not if you're being objective. You have to go with Michigan's group from last year because they had 3 or 4 guys that were doing what Notre Dame's 2 guys were doing. And so to me, that's why the depth of the defensive tackle position is going to determine how good this group can be. That's why it's important to get Gabriel Rubio back, and hopefully they do. That's why it's important for Jason Onye to take what he did this spring and build on it. And it's why it's imperative that Al Washington look at Sevillano and Houston and Vernon, and whether it's he recruited a guy or somebody else recruited a guy, coach all those kids up because there's a lot of young talent there as well. And that's going to determine just how good Notre Dame can be at defensive tackle in 2024. So let's look at defensive end. And here's the depth chart there. And as you can see, there's a lot of bodies there. The asterisks are walk-on players. And when I look at the defensive end position, it's going to look a lot different than it did last year at defensive end, but there's a chance that it's going to be pretty good. And this is actually a group that I think is going to be better than what we saw last season. RJ Oben, to me, is a player he's a quality player. He comes to Notre Dame with almost 20 career sacks at Duke. There was an adjustment this spring. Didn't see a ton from him in the spring. He did finish the spring off well in the spring game, but he's still learning that position. I need to see a little bit more from him. But I feel a lot better about where he is right now than where Javonte Jean-Baptiste was at this time a year ago. And we know the kind of season he had. I look at Josh Burnham replacing Nana Osafo-Mensah. Can Josh be the run stuffer that Nana was? Remains to be seen. Can Josh be more of a playmaker than Nana was? I fully expect him to be that. I don't have any doubt that he's going to be that, in fact, because he's already shown flashes of it, and he's just a different type of athlete than what Nana is. And that's something that, to me, has me excited. I mean, when you look at the type of production Nana had last year, in 112 pass rushes last year, Nana, as a fifth-year senior, had 8 pressures. Last year, Josh Burnham, in only 87 pass rushes in his first year playing defensive line, had 7 pressures on the quarterback. So I think there's a chance that Josh Burnham becomes a bit of a breakout player for Notre Dame this season. And so when I look at that, I think has a chance to be a really dynamic 1-2 punch. And I haven't even gotten yet to Bryce Young, who is still pretty raw, but as we all saw during the Blue Gold game, when he knows what he's doing, there's some freakiness there. And so when I think of RJ Open, veteran, gritty senior, has some nuance, has some, has some of that that veteran presence type of thing. And then you look at the type of athletes that they're going to be putting on the field with Josh Burnham and Bryce Young. You start seeing that's why you get fired up, because those two guys are really athletic and really twitchy. And that's why when I view this, when I look at this group, I believe even though you lost your top two ends, and Javonte and Nana were a really good duo last year. I don't want to take anything away from those kids. But this group, to me, goes 3 deep. Last year was 2 deep. And this year it's just more athletic. It's just a more athletic group. It is, especially in the second. I mean, you could say RJ and Javonte might be similar athletically. I know some people think RJ's more athletic. I know a couple people that think Javonte's a little bit more athletic. It's a wash. Let's just say it's a wash. There's no debating that the next two guys are more athletic than what we saw last year. I'm very excited about that group. Don't know what to expect from Gaden Gobira. We'll see how that one pans out. Loved him coming out of high school. He was starting to flash last year in the spring or in fall camp. Got hurt. Need to see him healthy and see what he's doing, and before I can really say a whole lot about him. The big question on the defensive line, defensive tackle and Viper. Viper's a whole. Defensive tackle depth, and Viper, just from top to bottom. Viper's a question mark. And really it comes down to me, a couple guys. Like I know folks around Notre Dame that just absolutely love Junior Tuihalamaka. And I hope they're right about him. I loved him coming out of high school. I don't love him. I didn't love him moving to defensive end or Viper. I just haven't seen it. I mean, I just haven't seen a guy that he's never really done it in a game. He's never been a guy that's produced play here, play there, but just there's no consistency there. I mean, last year he only produced 4 hurries the entire season. Just 4. That's it. 4 the entire season. Only produced 2 run stops the entire season. Josh Burnham last season. So Junior Tuihalamaka and Josh Burnham played almost identical snaps. Junior had 82 run snaps. Josh had 86. This is going to Pro Football Focus. Junior had 80 pass rush snaps. Josh had 87. So 80 pass rush snaps for Junior. He had 4 pressures the whole year. Josh had 7. So almost twice as many despite only playing 7 more snaps. But here's where it got bad. Junior played 82 run snaps. Josh played 486. According to Pro Football Focus, Junior Tuihalamaka only had 2 run stops the entire year. 2. Josh Burnham had 11 and only 86 run snaps. And here's what got it is even worse. Jordan Patelho played let me see here, total run snaps. Jordan Patelho last year played 181 total run snaps last year. That's 95 more than Burnham. He only had 3 more run stops than Burnham. I bring that up because Burnham's not there anymore. So you have, coming back to the Viper position, you have 22. Where is Boubacar? Let me find Boubacar here real quick. So Boubacar had 1 pressure last year. So you have 5. You have 23 total pressures coming back to your Viper depth chart next year. 25. That's it. You only have 17 total run stops coming back to your Viper depth chart this year. If you look at just Isaiah Foskey in 2022, he had 33 pressures and 26 run stops. That's not – Jordan Patel alone had 18 pressures in 2022, just by himself. So when you look at that lack of production at that position, I mean, heck, Justin Adamiola by himself in 2022, Justin Adamiola had 24 total pressures compared to 23. Then I say, what did I say? 23 from this current group. So Patel had 18, but Tuihalamaka had 4, Boubacar had 1. That's 23. And then Justin Adamiola by himself had 20 run stops that season. This group coming back has 17. So Justin Adamiola by himself outproduced the entire returning Viper depth chart from last season of guys that are still a Viper. Now, obviously, you throw Josh Burnham's numbers in there and they don't do it. That's 3 guys. 3 guys. that you're talking about. That's a problem. And I've heard people say, well, they don't use the Viper to rush the passer all the time. That's nonsense. They still use the Viper to rush the passer just as much as they did before on a per snap basis. They did not. They actually, matter of fact, if you look at the numbers, the coverage drops, percentage of coverage snaps from the Vipers last year was less per snap than what it was in 2022. Isaiah Foskey and Botelho and Adam Miola dropped into coverage more in 2022 at a much higher rate than what we saw last year. This is not about changing scheme, not asking the Vipers to do a whole lot. This isn't about, this isn't about spinning it. It wasn't good enough. The Viper position was not good enough. But, and this is my favorite but that I'm going to discuss here this offseason, I think. But I'm actually kind of a little bit encouraged about this group because Botelho is what he is. He's going to be a flashy player. I fully expect Jordan Botelho to be better in 2023 because let's be honest, guys. There's selfish reasons, and this is not an insult. This is not me taking a shot at Jordan Botelho. This is just being realistic. There's selfish reasons for Jordan Botelho to be as focused as he's ever been in his career. Because why? This is his last year of college football. If he wants to go play in the National Football League, he needs to step up this year. So I certainly expect him to be better. The only question is how much better. Are we going to get the Syracuse 22, South Carolina 22 version of Jordan Botelho? Or are we going to get the guy that just disappears for long stretches of times and then is flashy? Can we see consistency from him? That's what we don't know about Jordan Botelho. That's what he's got to prove. But I think he's going to be better. And then there's Junior Talamaka. I mean, I think he'll be better. I don't know if he can be worse. I think he's going to be better with just experience. But the wild card here to me is Boubacar Traore. That's going to be the key that to me is going to determine just how good this group can be. We all saw it in the blue gold game, and we saw the same thing the week before in the Jersey scrimmage. When Boubacar is locked in, he's got explosiveness that nobody else in the roster has. He's got a first step that nobody on the roster has, in my opinion, at least not a Viper. He can add something to the table. Now, he's still raw. He's got one move. It's a speed to power edge rush. That's it. He's got to develop counter moves. He's got to be able to sometimes maybe show a little bit of a slower start and then rip by you, move inside. He's got to be able to use his hands better. He still has a lot to learn, but he has the potential to really take that next step. If Al Washington can do a good job developing him this offseason, Boubacar could go a long way towards making this a much improved group. If the Viper group can give you more production, if they can just give you a 50% jump on what they did last year, just 50%, that's not even that big of an increase. That's how bad their numbers were last year. If they can just give you a 50% increase as a group, that to me makes this a top 3 defensive line. I really believe that. Let's just be generous, top 5 defensive line. If the defensive end, if the Viper position can give you that. I think as it stands right now, Notre Dame's got a top 7 to 10 level defensive line because of the lack of pass rushing production from the edge, especially your weak side position, which is the Viper. If that group can get better, then this defensive line in 2024 could be special. As it is, it's a top 10 group as it is. That's really good. It's a top 10 defensive line as is. I think it's strong at defensive end. I think your starting lineup at defensive tackle is as good as anybody in college football, and the depth showed a lot of promise this spring. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot to be excited about this group for 2024. So when you look at the state of the union, so to speak, for the defensive line, the current state of the defensive line is strong. For 2024, it's strong. It's very good, and it has a chance to be truly elite if those things that we talked about can be improved. And that's what we look at when you talk about the present. Then you dive into the future, and that's where the conversation changes a little bit. So the future of the defensive line, what is it? I don't know. This is where I come from. I hate not knowing. I like being able to say, hey, look, and here's what I mean by hate not knowing. We don't ever really know what's going to happen. But you can look at things. I can look at the depth chart. I can make a prognostic. Hey, I like the town. I like this. I think that's good. There's certain things I know. I know this is at least the floor of what this group can be. And when I look at the defensive line, I really get kind of concerned because there's so much that we don't know. And here's what I mean by that. What I don't know, the big question mark for me is this. Well, here's the thing I know about Al Washington. And this is where my uncertainty comes from, is Coach Washington. Because here's what I know. I know that Coach Washington could take a veteran group of players and get a lot out of them. He did it in 2016 at Boston College, where he inherited Harold Landry and Zach Allen. And there was one other kid that he had that year that was a veteran, and he got a lot out of them. They were very good. He coached the line, I think, for like 1 or 2 years. I saw him do that in 2022 to a degree with some veteran players. But then you come into 2023, he goes into year 2, and he does a really good job with Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and you had a pretty good defensive line. And what he showed us, without any question, is that he can take a veteran group of players that were in large part developed by somebody else and coach them up into being a pretty good defensive line. And here's what I mean by that. I am taking nothing away from the job Al Washington did with Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Javonte Jean-Baptiste last year. Taking nothing away from him. He did what he needed to do. No question. But let's be honest about something. You have to give some of the credit for Javonte's success to Larry Johnson, who coached the kid for 5 years, who's considered one of the better D-line coaches in the business. The guy that coached Riley Mills for his first 2 years, who coached Howard Cross for his first 3 years, Jordan Patel for his first 2 years, is Mike Elston, who is walking around California right now. I'm saying hyperbolically because he's probably not doing this, but the point is, he's walking around California right now with a national championship ring. What's the group of players that we're talking about being in contention with Notre Dame's players for the top D-line job? It's Michigan. So Mike Elston primarily recruited or developed the top 2 defensive tackle tandems in the country for next year. Michigan guys he recruited and developed, and then the Notre Dame guys who he recruited and developed earlier in their careers. Well, that says something to me. I don't know that Al Washington can recruit that type of talent, and I don't know that Al Washington can take guys that are young and turn them into impact players. So that's why I'm confident that R.J. Oben's going to be good, because Al Washington showed me that he can go out and recruit a veteran transfer guy, bring him in, and develop him more. You can give Larry Johnson credit for what he did with Javonte Jean-Baptiste, but Javonte did things in Notre Dame he never did at Ohio State. You can't deny that either. If you can, in some attempt to take credit away from Al Washington, you can't say, well, Larry Johnson gets all the credit for that. No, because what he did at Notre Dame was beyond what he ever did at Ohio State. And that's a tribute to Al Washington. He deserves credit for that. He deserves credit for helping take Riley Mills to the next level and Howard Cross to the next level. But the foundation was laid by somebody else, by 2 guys that I think are considered 2 of the better D-line coaches in college football. Now, Mike Elston's in the NFL, but he was in college football. Larry Johnson, Mike Elston recruited and laid the foundation for Notre Dame's best defensive lineman last year. No question. Now we get into, well, okay, cool. Keep doing that in 2024. Do that with R.J. Oben. Keep doing that with Riley Mills. Keep doing that with Howard Cross. The problem is for this defense to really take the next step in 24, and even more importantly, 25 and beyond, he's got to now show that he can develop young players. Guys that either A, he recruited, or B, only he coached. And that's what he steps into. I have some concerns about this for a host of reasons. Number one is, one of the things that Mike Elston was always praised for, it's something that I praise Mike Mickens a lot for, is coaching the entire depth chart, coaching the young guys, the guys that don't play a lot, the scout team guys just as hard and as well as he coaches the veterans. I don't know that that's necessarily happening right now. Depends on who you talk to. But there's no doubt it needs to get better. You're going into a year where you're talking about guys like Donovan Heinisch, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka, Boubacar Traore, Bryce Young, guys that have only been coached by you, Devin Houston, Brennan Vernon, guys that have only been coached by you. I don't care who recruited them. They've only been coached by you. Can Al Washington get out of them what he has gotten out of the veterans? I don't know. We'll start to get our answer in 2024. If Josh Burnham doesn't take a step this year, if Junior doesn't take a step this year, if Jason Onye, Gabriel Rubio, guys that have been primarily coached by Al Washington, but even more so the younger players, Boubacar, Devin Houston, Brennan Vernon, if those guys don't take steps this year, then I have to really question, can you take young guys and develop? I know you can take veterans and develop them, but can you take young guys and develop them? Like Harry, and that was a question about Harry Heastan when he first got to Notre Dame. Like, look, okay, you showed up and, Zach Martin was going into his third year in college, right? Chris Martin was going to his third year. Braxton Cave, Mike Golick, they were veteran players that had been in the program for several years. Ed Warner had laid that foundation. Can you build your own line? Well, yeah, he showed he could do that. He went out in 2015 with an offensive line that was recruited by him primarily, developed primarily by him. I think Nick Martin had spent 1 year with the previous coaching staff, but Ronnie Stanley only coached by him. Steve Elmer only coached by him. Mike McGlinchey only coached for him all but 1 year. I mean, Quentin Nelson only coached by him, all coached by him. 17 offensive line, recruited and coached by him. He showed he could do that. Mike Mickens has shown that he can take guys that only he coaches and only he recruits and develop them into studs. That's what the great coaches do. You've got to be able to do that. And so we have to learn that about Coach Washington. And the answer won't be, well, look what Riley Mills did. Look what Howard Cross did. He'll get credit for that. And no one should ever take away any credit for the job he's done with Javonte Jean-Baptiste, or if he does with RJ Oben or Howard Cross or Riley Mills. He gets more credit for developing Howard Cross than Mike Elston does because he's the one that was there that took him to that next level. But you also can't take away the fact that Mike Elston laid that foundation. Same with Riley Mills. Can Al Washington lay the foundation? We don't know that. We don't know that he can. We don't know that he can't. That's the thing. It's truly an unknown. This isn't a let's take a shot at Al Washington session. This is a being honest about what he's done. Because I've pointed this out before. You don't have a track record to go back to. Like if you look at, like, you could say this, okay, well, Deland McCullough is kind of the same thing because Deland McCullough didn't take over at Notre Dame until 2022. So Logan Diggs and Audric Estime were already there, et cetera, et cetera. But I can look back at Deland McCullough and say, okay, but I know the track record. I know what he did at Indiana with guys he recruited and developed. The track record is there. Without Washington, he doesn't have that track record. He was a D-line coach for 2 seasons at Boston College, 4 years apart. He was the assistant special teams and D-line coach in 2012. Then he coached running backs for 3 years. Then he spent 1 year coaching D-line in 2016. He was the D-line coach for 1 year at Cincinnati. Michigan, he was the linebackers coach for 1 year. And at Ohio State, he was a linebackers coach for 3 years. Did well early, but in 2021, when it was players that hadn't been developed by somebody else, he didn't do as good of a job, and he got run out. I think that's a little unfair. So, but the point is, we look, because I think there was other issues going on that Al Washington became sort of the scapegoat for some of those things. But the fact of the matter is that the job wasn't very well done. So we don't know that he can do that. He can take that group of young players and say, I'm going to take you from start to finish and turn you into something special. We have no clue if he can do that. He may be great at it. I don't know, because he's never had to do it. He's never been anywhere longer than 2 or 3 years. And so to me, I have a major question about that. Can he, because the ultimate success of this D-line in 24, but even more so in the future, is going to hinge on that. So so this year, Burnham needs to take a big jump. If Josh Burnham doesn't have a breakout year, then I question that. If Boubacar Traore can't make a jump, then I question that. If you can't figure out a way to coach up Brennan Vernon and Devin Houston, and I don't want to hear stuff about, they're not consistent enough, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. I understand all that. Same thing as excuses we have with Tyson Ford. If Notre Dame goes through a period of time where you have Tyson Ford, Devin Houston, and Brendan Vernon, and you can't coach any of those guys up to be contributors, then I got to say, maybe they're not the problem. I'm not saying that's going to happen. They're all still young. I'm simply making, you can say, okay, well, yeah, but Tyson Ford's this and Devin. So you can't get any of those guys on track, none of those guys on track. You're going to need to. You're going to need to. When you say Cole Mullins has already had a high motor. You're going to put him instead of, can you take the guys that aren't self-starters? Can you take the guys that need molded and developed? Howard Cross is a self-starter. Riley Mills is a self-starter. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a self-starter, right? Donovan Heinisch is a self-starter. Can you take those younger players that maybe need molding and pushing as players, but also as young men, and develop them? That's a question. Why is it a question? Never seen him do it. We should start to see it this year. If we start to see those young guys emerge, and it doesn't have to be week one. If Boubacar Traore doesn't have 4 sacks by the end of game 3, or Josh Burnham doesn't have 4 sacks by the end of game 3, you don't sit there and say, freaking now Washington can't get the job. No, that's not fair. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not even saying he won't do it. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm generally saying we don't know because he's never done it before. He's never taken that foundation. But if by the middle of the season, we get to the end of season, some guys are breaking out, then I'll start feeling a little bit better about, okay, Jason Onye is an example. Now, Jason Onye was coached for, I believe, a year by Mike Elston, but it was a weird year, and it was only for 1 year, and he didn't play a whole lot. He was on scout team. If Jason Onye has a breakout, you can look at Al Washington and say, okay, you didn't recruit him, and he was coached by somebody else for a year, but dog, you had him for 3 years. Like, you get the credit for that. So Jason Onye is another one that I look at and say, if the breakout comes, then you have to give Al Washington some credit. A guy here, guy there, but there needs to be multiples of those guys. If that happens, then I'm going to feel really good about the future of the defensive line from a development standpoint. That gets us into our second question, and that's the recruiting aspect. What I don't know about Al Washington is, can he recruit consistently? We've seen some good things. We've seen some not so good things. We don't need to talk a whole lot about it, but there needs to be more consistency. There's people that look at Al Washington, who's probably the most polarizing coach on the staff when it comes to how the fans treat him. It's like he's either terrible or he does everything right, and there's like no in between, and there's a lot of in between. He's had some big wins. I mean, you can't deny that. He's had some big wins. If they end up, I don't know that I'd give him all the credit in the world for Boubacar. I mean, he played a role. There's no doubt. Some of the guys that they brought in were guys that were recruited by other people. But he deserves a big part of why Javonte Jean-Baptiste came. That's a recruiting win. I mean, it's a graduate guy, but it's a recruiting win. You got Chris. Look at the current freshman class. I mean, Bryce Young. Yes, Bryce Young was going to lean towards Notre Dame, but you had to not blow it, and he didn't blow it. I like the Logan Thomas pickup. I'm a big Cole Mullins guy. I had some questions about Sean Sevillano, but so far, Sean's done some nice things. 2025, some frustrating things that have happened in 2025, but you can't ignore the fact that he beat Ohio State and Michigan for Christopher Burgess. Can't ignore that. I like the Joseph Reif pickup. I like the Davion Dixon pickup. Those are good things. And far too often, when a mistake is made by a coach or a coach doesn't do something correct, we will ignore the wins and only focus on the losses. And that's not right. Just like it's not right to ignore the Justin Scott situation or other losses and only focus on the wins. There has to be a happy medium in this conversation. And there's a happy medium. There has to be honesty in this conversation. And here's the honesty of it, right? This is the reality. This is, to me, not debatable. Al Washington has shown that he can recruit good players to Notre Dame, including at times some big wins. What coach has not shown is that he's a good evaluator and that he is good at getting the tough wins consistently. He's gotten a couple. Chris Burgess was not an easy win. I would argue, however, that Chris Burgess is a little bit more prone to liking Notre Dame than maybe some other kids. So he's done a good job, but can he do a great job? That I don't know. And I don't care about recruiting rankings. I'm going to give him a lot of credit for getting Joseph Reif. I like Joseph Reif. That's a good evaluation. But then I got to question, what is up with your Marco Jones evaluation? I don't like your Owen Wafel evaluation. I didn't like your Justin Scott evaluation. There's a lot of different things you can look at and say, man, like, I don't know about this. So that's the other part that comes into my concerns about the future are he's got to recruit at a more consistent level. I can point to every position on the team and say, okay, receiving's got to get better, but here's their plan. Here's what they're trying to do. Corner's got to finish. Safety, linebacker, they got to finish. I know the plan. I don't know what the plan is on defensive line recruiting. I have no clue. No clue. And that's not a good thing, right? So to me, it's not. And somebody said his closing ability is sketchy. I actually don't think his closing is that bad. I think his evaluations are not good. And I think when he misses, it's because he doesn't go as hard after a guy that he should. That's what I think the bigger issue is. I think if he would have been all in on going after Marco Jones, I feel pretty good about Notre Dame's chances of landing Marco Jones. If you had just Marco Jones at his class, I'm like, dude, it's a pretty darn good defensive line class. You got a top 100 caliber guy in Chris Burgess. You got a definite top 100 guy in Marco Jones. I got Davion Dixon in my top 150. Joseph Reeves, a top 250 guy with a very high ceiling. I'm digging that D-line class. But it's always that one big mistake that you don't win that kind of takes some of the shine off, right? And that's where coaches got to get better. So he's close. But now you got to take that next step as a developer, and you got to take that next step as an evaluator, and you got to take that next step as a finisher. And so that's why I say for Al Washington, this next year is going to be huge for him. Get the most out of your veterans. We already know you can do that. I fully expect him to do that. Take some of those young guys and get them to that next step. If he can do that, then this D-line in 2024 is going to be nasty. What does that mean? That's going to make his recruiting job even easier in 2026, where they're on some very talented players, but it's pretty good players. Are they going to be able to get any elite guys? That I don't know. And so the on-field product could help you with that. I mean, if Howard Cross and Riley Mills are both day 2 draft picks last year, or even if somebody one of them goes in the first round, and then RJ Open gets picked next year, all of a sudden you're looking at Al Golden or Al Sharpie like, yo, this cat's putting some dudes in the NFL. That's going to make his recruiting job a lot easier. And so it all goes together. So everything I'm saying to you right now is not he can't do it. He won't do it. It's I don't know. He's done a great job here, solid job here, but that's got to get better. So great job developing, building the veteran players. Got to get better. Recruiting's got to get better, but you're showing some progress, right? You've had some good wins. In the middle is, can you develop young players? That nobody knows the answer to that. And anybody tells you they do, they're guessing. They're just guessing because he's never done it. So the hope is that we'll learn this year if he can. And if he does it, then this D-line is going to be really good, and that's going to make his recruiting job a lot easier. And that's when I'll say the future of the defensive line can be as good as the present. And that's the answer we're going to have to find out from Al Washington. And that's where we're at when it comes to the Notre Dame defensive line. Present, it looks really good. There are some things that can happen in the present, and if they do, will make us feel a whole lot better about the future. There's a chance for the future to be really good. And here's what I mean by that. If Al Washington proves this year that he can develop young players, right? He can take young guys and maximize their ability just like he can the veterans. We're going into 2025 with what I think is going to be like Gabe Rubio, Jason Onye, Donovan Heinisch, Sean Sevillano, Armel Mukam, Devin Houston, Brennan Vernon, loaded interior depth chart. Loaded. You're going to, at Viper, you're going to have Boubacar Traore. You're going to have Logan Thomas. You have to find somebody else to play there, maybe a portal guy. And then maybe you move Josh Burnham back there. You're going to have Bryce Young. You're going to have potentially Aiden Gobira. You're going to have Chris Burgess. You're going to have a chance to have a very talented, long, athletic defensive line. And the God-given physical talent of the 25 line, in my opinion, will be even greater than that of the 24 defensive line because some of the younger players will be closer to their peaks. Think about that. So talent-wise should be really good, but we've got to get the question answered of can Al Washington get the most out of it? That's the unknown. And that's what's going to ultimately tell us how good this D-line can be, is that right there. So that's going to do it for the D-line discussion. We're going to watch a little film here next, and it's not going to be a super long segment, but we're going to watch some film, and we're going to talk about 2026 quarterbacks next. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and if you don't mind, we would greatly appreciate your support by signing up for Irish Breakdown's Champions Lounge. That's boards. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Now, before we do get into the quarterback room, I did want to answer 2 quick questions from Super Chats, and I appreciate those. Iden Banami with Super Chat. Thank you, my friend. What is the most important time for strength conditioning on the calendar? Spring, summer, or during the season? All important, but most important also, scum cheated. Agree with that. Look, I don't agree with the premise of the question. I don't believe that you have a most important time. It's all matters. If you don't do well in the winter, let's say I were to say, okay, summer's most important because it's the period right before the season. Okay, I can make that case. But if I don't do well enough in the winter and spring, then I'm working behind the 8 ball a little bit in the summer. You can make a case that the winter is more important than the fall and then the summer. Okay. But if I lay a great foundation in January, but then my plan in the spring and summer is not good enough and we lose that momentum, then it doesn't matter. It really has to all work together. And I know we kind of look for things like, well, what's the most important thing? Well, it's kind of all important. And they're different. So what I would say is if you want what's most important for laying the foundation? Well, that's the winter. What's the most important period of time to really have the big mass gains and the strength gains? Well, that's kind of the winter. What's the period of time where it's most important to really start the reshaping of a body process? Well, I think that's kind of spring. And that's starting to kind of get into game shape. It's kind of spring. What's the period of time that's most important for getting your conditioning right, getting your football workouts more zeroed in? Well, that's the summer, right? That's the summer period leading into fall camp. That's when the football drills are even more important. That's when the conditioning starts becoming more of an emphasis. You're not going to do as much of the conditioning in the winter. You're always doing conditioning, but it's an even greater point of emphasis in the summer. So my point being that you can't just look at it and say, well, what's the one most important time? Because they all can trump each other if they're all not given the same level of importance. They all serve a great purpose for different things. They're all the most important for different things. So if you want me to answer this question better in the future, then ask me something more specific. What's the best time for strength gains? Okay, I have an answer for that. It's probably winter. What's the most important time for conditioning? As I mentioned, it's probably summer. And that's really where it's at. But honestly, Iden, it's got to be a complete package. And you've got to have a great maintenance and building program for the fall, especially now that you're playing 16 games. So it's all important. The emphasis is different. You're going to emphasize certain things in one period of time, and other things get more emphasized in other periods of time. But it truly is all important. And then we have a super chat from ND Milton fan. It says, where do you prefer Burnham, Junior Telemaca, Cole Mullins, and Brennan Vernon? Well, I prefer Josh Burnham at Viper. I prefer Junior Telemaca at middle linebacker, but that's not an option anymore. I would actually flip him and Burnham, honestly. I would put Junior at defensive end where he can kind of be big and physical and those type of things. And then I'd put Burnham at Viper. That's what I would do, especially for 2025. I think a 1-2 punch of Burnham and Traore in 2025 could be filthy at Viper. My concern is that they're going to put weight on Josh Burnham now, and then will he maybe lose a step of that explosiveness when he goes to that next step, when he gets to that kind of that size where he kind of really fits to that position. Then you get into the aspects of, okay, can he still have that twitchiness and those type of things if you do want to move him down the road. Cole Mullins, I think I would put him at big end. I do not think he needs to be a Viper. excuse me, a three technique. I'm okay having Brendan Vernon at three technique. I think he'd probably prefer to be on the edge. I kind of like him there. I know he's a little light for that position now. It's not as light as Cole Mullins. He's very raw technically. Here's the thing. Brennan, to me, is a good athlete. He's a big, strong kid, but he's super raw. He's the kind of kid you've got to really push and massage and really spend the time on. If you're not a coach that likes coaching up raw, like there are some coaches, guys, this is a reality. I don't know what Al Washington is. This is a general statement. There are some coaches that just don't like raw players. I want finished products, and I want to get the kid with the great motor and it's already been get the great foundation, and I want to coach them up. Every coach likes those. Some of those coaches just love that to the point to where I don't like coaching raw players. I personally loved coaching raw players. Maybe that's partly because the levels I was at, it's kind of what you have to deal with at the FCS and Division III level. But I loved it because it's like I'm getting this ball of clay that I can just kind of mold however I want. I've got a few bad habits to break, but not a ton. Like I gotta really coach this kid up how I want him. I don't have to convince him that his high school coach was wrong, because he doesn't really know any better. He's coming here and he's ready to go. And as long as the kids want to learn. Some guys I want to finish product so I can go do my thing. I don't know what Al Washington is, but I'm just going to tell you right now, with guys like Brennan Vernon, guys like Devin Houston, guys like Tyson Ford, those guys are balls of clay. You got to have a passion for developing those young people that way, on and off the field. And if he does have that passion and takes that pride, and again, I don't know that he does or doesn't. I truly have no idea. If he has that passion, then some of the Armo Mukum's another one. Then some of those guys are going to pan out. Some of them won't. They're not all going to pan out. He could be the best developer of young people on the planet, and some of those guys aren't going to pan out. But some of them better. Some of them need to. But you've got to have a passion for those kind of guys because they take a different type of work. Like Donovan Heinisch, you coach and develop Donovan Heinisch completely differently than how you're going to coach and develop Brennan Vernon or Devin Houston. Completely different circumstances and scenarios. You are not going to have to put a foot up Donovan Heinisch's behind. There's no way you're going to be harder on Donovan than he's going to be harder on himself. That's the way the Heinisches are. Now your job is to give him the technique and help him develop his game and his repertoire and steer him in the right direction. But like with Donovan, it's kind of like that kid that you're kind of holding his shirt and you're like, okay, we're not going to let you go yet. I'm trying to tell you what to do. But as soon as you let go of that jersey, man, he's a man, just an animal. Just boom, boom, boom. Right? He just needs to kind of be told where to go and what to do and how to do it. Some of those kids are like, they got a million questions they want to ask. You got to work with those kids too. Some of those kids need to get a foot put up their butts. You got to work with those too. And so we're going to see about that. But that's kind of one of those guys that Brennan Vernon is. And if they're willing to work with him and not just write him off, then I think he could be a really outstanding three technique, very much in the mold of a Riley Mills. I very much think he could be that kind of player. And so that's where I would put him. You could play him at big end. And I think he's athletic enough to play big end, but I just think he could be really, really good inside a three technique. That's just my stance. But I'd be okay playing him at big end as well. And I don't understand that. I don't understand why they moved him to three technique and then buried him behind a 245-pound freshman. If you don't think he can play three technique, then put him back out at big end and let him be a backup there. Burying the depth chart there because he can play that because he's played it before. So I don't really understand that one. I really don't understand that one. All right, let's get to the quarterback thing next. But like I said, I did want to get to some questions there before we got that started. So, final section of today's show is going to be a film room, and we're going to talk about 2026 quarterbacks Brady Hart of Cocoa High School in Florida and Noah Grubbs from Lake Mary High School in Florida. Two very talented football players. Two guys that have very unique rankings profiles because you're going to see two guys that some recruiting services think are very good and other recruiting services think are just good. And I don't quite understand what the difference is, but welcome to the recruiting world of today, guys. You've got some people that have some very interesting takes on players. And then you have some other people that I think kind of get it right. And everybody has a little bit of a difference of opinion on some of these guys. So let's just talk about these two players. I'm going to begin with Noah Grubbs. Let me just make sure I actually have Noah's film up first. Yeah, I have Noah's film up first. So we'll get to him first. Noah Grubbs is a big kid, He's listed at 6'4", anywhere between 190 to 205 pounds. Great frame, which you guys will see on film. Big armed kid, 2-year starter in high school. As a freshman, he passed for 17 touchdowns and 6 picks, had 1,593 total yards in 11 games. As a sophomore this past year at Lake Mary, he passed for 3,670 yards, saw his completion percentage go up over 7 percentage points, averaged 305.8 yards per game, had 49 touchdowns and 10 interceptions last season, and had a game. I have to go look at the game by game, but he had a game where I think he threw something like 7 or 8 touchdowns last year. Yeah, it threw 8 touchdowns last year in a win over Dr. Phillips, 76-60 win over Dr. Phillips. Had another game with 5, another game with 6. So he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games last year out of 13 where he had 3 or more touchdowns, and he had 3, 4, 5, 6 games with 5 or more touchdowns last season as a sophomore. That's passing touchdowns. He's not much of a runner. I think he's actually on the minus for his career, I believe. Yes, no, he's +3 for his career in rushing yards, and he had 4 rushing touchdowns last year, all short, near the goal line type situations. And as you'll see on film, he's got good pocket mobility. He's got good foot quickness in the pocket, but he doesn't bring a whole lot of value as a runner. From a ranking standpoint, Noah Grubbs is lowest ranked by On3, who has him ranked number 219. I have no clue what they look at quarterback evaluations, but this is a common theme every year. ESPN has him number 195. 247 Sports has him at number 165. Rivals has him at number 44. My grade for him is closer to Rivals. He's a borderline top 50 kid. He's not quite top 50 for me yet, but he's borderline top 50 for me. Definitely has a 4.5-star upside grade already. We'll see how he goes as a junior and a senior. Kid has an impressive offer list. You look at, obviously, Michigan has offered him. He's been offered by Texas A&M, Arkansas, Auburn, Duke. Let's see here. Auburn, Duke, Arkansas. Trying to go down here. Florida, Miami, Ole Miss, Nebraska, North Carolina, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Penn State, Pitt, Syracuse, Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, and UCF have all offered Noah Grubbs a scholarship. So we'll get into Noah's film first, and then we'll talk a little bit about Brady Hart, and I'm going to talk about what I like about these players and some areas where they have to improve upon. And then at the end, I'm going to kind of wrap it up with what I want to see with quarterback recruiting in the 2025 class. So let's bring up some film, and we're going to begin by breaking down Mr. Noah Grubbs. And the first thing that you guys are going to see when we start watching this film is this is a kid with a very big frame. And he's going to be, to me, minimum 225 pounds when it's all said and done. Let's make this a little bigger so you can see more. A couple things I like about him that you'll also notice about him. A big kid, but this is also a kid that has a really strong arm. Ball comes out of his hand with a lot of velocity. He's not really a big wind-up kid. He gets a lot of torque. Watch the power. This isn't like a slow delivery. This isn't one where he's really winding up. But watch the torque that he generates with that arm speed that he has, and the ball just flies out of his hand. Gets a lot of zip here. That's about a 25-yard throw from where he threw it, and gets it on there in a hurry. And he has a very, very strong arm. You'll see here as well, throws off his back foot. That is a corner route off of his back foot that he throws for a touchdown. Now, that's one of those ones that I would say don't ever do that again, because this throw ends up being a touchdown in high school. That's an interception again in college, right? So those are things that you learn as a quarterback to do and not to do. But what I like is the arm strength. This is basically a far hash throw into the corner that he gets over there while fading away and falling back and about to be hit. So you're going to see the arm strength. This kid has a very powerful arm. He has throws on here. There's a throw from his sophomore year. I don't remember if he has any as a junior that travels over 50 yards in the air. This is a zip. Look at this. Again, what you have to, this play is important. This is going to help you understand a little something. So you'll see guys that can throw with a lot of zip, but they have to wind up. It's like pitchers. You can have 2 pitchers that throw 95. One guy throws 95 effortlessly. The other guy throws 95 with full force. He's got to get everything into it. I want the effortless guy. That's more repeatable, less wear and tear, And also the effortless guy gets it faster. So when you watch this kid's arm speed, what you're going to see is he does not have to wind up and really get a lot into it, but he gets a lot of power in that arm. Watch how much he does a great job of driving through with his hips. You can see the arm. I mean, it comes with power like he's throwing a punch. And that explains why he gets so much zip on the football. And you see this ball just flies into this guy. I mean, he makes this look easy. So it looks like he's kind of it looks like he's putting full effort into it, but he's really not. He just has that natural, powerful arm. And you can see it here as well. The ball just jumps out of this kid's hand. Light on his feet. There's some things I want to see. They're a little bit too hoppy at the top of that. I don't want to see that much hop, but it's okay. You see a nice gather, gets the ball out, makes a good read, throws accurately. You watch film, he'll have some misses that you don't want to see a quarterback miss on film. There's some footwork things he needs to improve, but it's all coached. We actually have pretty good ball placement, actually. It's just consistency is the key. Here again, nice, easy flow, reads the defense, gets the ball out over top. Again, shows off his arm talent. Kid has a big time arm, like one of the best, just pure arm strength. He has some of the best arm strength and some of the best arm talent in the room. He also is a kid that can throw off platform. This is an example. This isn't so much changing arm angles, which he does. It's throwing off platform. It's not there. He's getting pressured. He just goes and makes a play. And that's where that arm strength and that arm talent comes into play. As you'll see in these clips, he does show me good pocket mobility, even though he's not much of a runner. This is another throw that's just a great throw. This is from about the 47-yard line, middle of the field. Guy catches it about the 2. That's a 45-yard throw, 3-step drop, drops it right over the outside shoulder. Guy makes a good play on it. He drifts a little bit. The receiver does. That's why it doesn't quite go outside. This is another really good throw. This is a corner route he throws from about the 38-yard, foot's on the 38-yard line. Guy catches it, I believe, inside the 10. This is a corner route that he throws off of his back foot, catches it inside the 5. This is a 30-plus yard throw on a corner route off his back foot fading away. Now, I would want to work on that a little bit. I'd want to get a little bit more drive off that back foot and snap it just a little bit more. Like you can see, doesn't really snap the arm a little bit. Again, it's just sophomore. But the fact that he can do those things that I would correct and still get the ball out there is impressive. And it shows you the young man's arm strength on this particular play. Again, nice rhythm in the pocket, doesn't have heavy feet. Like a lot of guys that aren't runners or aren't superly mobile have really heavy feet in the pocket. Noah does not have heavy feet, right? It's not super quick, but he stays light on his feet. He's always moving. He's always in position to throw. You can see him working through his progressions, and he gets the ball off. This is Noah Grubbs, by the way, for those who are asking about that. And then, of course, you see the arm strength to be able to fit balls into tight spots. So I really, again, far hash throw. And high school hashes are further away. So this is a far hash throw on an outcut that he gets out, on deep outcut to the sideline. That's a big-time throw. That's a really big-time throw. And something that you really like. And you're going to see something similar from Brady Hart's film, where Brady's not really a runner either, but Brady has the athleticism to be a runner. This is one of those ones where he aims a little bit. You can see watch his arm speed change. And this is something that I want to work with him. And he's got a good quarterbacks coach in high school that he works with that I'm sure will work on this. But like, this is what I don't like to see from quarterbacks on deep balls, where they slow the arm down. See that? He slows his arm down. He tries to float it and aim it. What happens? Ball's underthrown a little bit. Now, this is a completion away from this is a completion in high school, but I don't know that this is a completion against good teams at the next level. And so to me, you want to say, hey, listen, it's one thing to if you want to get the ball over top, what changes is not your arm speed. It's you dip your back shoulder a little bit, and you get a little a little bit more dip on your back foot, and then that's going to change. And then your release point is a little sooner, and that sooner release point gets the ball to go up and down. CJ Carr's great at this. You don't slow your arm speed down. So I'd want to still see snap that thing off, and that ball is going to get over top and lead that guy right into the end zone. So again, there's plenty of areas where this young man can get better, and that's an encouraging thing. Because hey, folks, guess what? Noah Grubbs doesn't have it all figured out by his sophomore year of high school. Big shocker. right? But the talent is enormous. This is not an easy throw either. He throws this ball from the 38-yard line, can't really set his feet because there's pressure coming, and he hits this wheel route in the cover 2 hole around the 5-yard line. That's an impressive throw. Very impressive throw. Again, lots of arm talent with this young man. Lots of arm talent. This is a really nice throw up the seam. Quick drop, gets to that pack drop, drives off his back foot. There's some technical things he'll work off here. But I think what I think happens here is I don't think he anticipates throwing the ball this quickly. I think the read dictated it, and he's like, I got to get that ball out there. And he drives it. I also like the ball placement here because if he leads this guy, the cornerback drives on it. He's got to put that ball right on the seam and right on the numbers to prevent that corner because they're trying to play cover 3 here, which means that corner is responsible for driving on the seam. Well, he can't do that here because the ball gets there so quickly and ends up being a touchdown. So again, really, really impressive arm talent. The consistency is going to be the key for Noah. Here's another one like we saw similar. Consistency from a footwork standpoint, consistency from a, just a what you want to do with your release point consistency. Not that it's always the same because it's not going to be the same depending on the throw you're making, but just when you want to throw it a certain way, have some consistency. Nice touch here. Gets the ball over top, shows some nice touch. Again, you don't want a guy that's just power, power, power all the time. You've got to understand that there's got to be a little bit of touch involved as well. And Noah does a good job getting the ball over top, showing good touch. The one thing is if wherever this kid goes, whoever gets Noah Grubbs is going to have a quarterback that's good at throwing the deep ball. There's no doubt about that. That's the one thing we do know. Can he do the little things? Can he read the RPO game? Those are things I still have questions about. But I think he's a smart kid. He processes really well for a young player. I think he's coached well. He's got a lot of arm talent. He's just got to get a little bit more. I'd like to see him a little bit more mobile, as just being able to kind of do a little bit more with his legs, and then just clean up some of those other things. But the foundation he's building on is outstanding. Really, really outstanding. Good timing, good read, good ball placement, touchdown. There's a lot of talent, this young man. So you guys can see the things that I like about Noah Grubbs. You see the arm talent. He changes velocity. He can change his arm angle. He's got nice mobile footwork. You can see him make quick reads, quick processing, understands ball placement. Got to be more consistent. It's got to continue to develop as a young player and just keep building. That's the thing is that the tools are there. The tools are there. Like, look at this. This is a 3x1 3x2 alignment. This is empty. He reads the play to the boundary, sees that it's not there, immediately comes backside, finds that seam, and bangs that sucker in the window between the two safeties. That's not just having arm talent. That's also, you got to make some decisions and throw with timing. You got to know where the defense is, where your receivers are, and get the ball where it needs to get to. Nice quick throw there. Some really good stuff. Really good stuff there from Noah Grubbs. You guys can see why I like this kid, right? Strong arm, big body, nice touch, nice feel. Does a lot of things really well, and he's just scratching the surface of what he's going to be. Again, you're talking about a kid still has 2 more years of high school football left. So he's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. There's a lot to work with there. I would say he's a little bit closer to being a finished product physically than Brady Hart, but both of them still have a lot of room to work. But I love the kid's deep ball. That's the thing you're seeing a lot of. Here's the thing. You guys are seeing a lot of these. We're only halfway through the film. We're not going to watch all the film, but we're halfway through the film here of this kid. And there's a lot of big time throws. Yeah, Nathan, he's got a pretty fast release. It's a tad long, but that's going to be the case with a 6'4" kid. Brady Hart's got a little bit one too. The length I don't mind, but it's got to be fast, and his is fast. This is a great ball. He throws this from the 44-yard line. It is a near hash throw. His back foot's on the 44. The receiver catches it in the end zone. He's got a guy coming off the edge, not unblocked, but kind of close to unblocked. He knows he's coming. He's got a D tackle coming up the middle. Is that a blitz? That's a blitzing linebacker coming up the middle. Clearly beats his guard. He knows he's going to have a chance to get hit, but he lets the ball loose, throws it off his back foot, flicks it on the air, over the top, right to his receiver for a touchdown. That is a big-time throw. One of the best throws he's got on film. This is another phenomenal throw. This is that combination of speed and touch or power and touch that you need. The ball's got to get up if it's going to have a chance, but it also can't float. And this is what I like. A lot of guys think getting it up in the air means you can't put velocity on it, and I don't agree with that. And this is a really nice job here. That's a really good throw, but he doesn't float it. Gets it up, but it gets up and gets down. It's like that throw CJ Carr made in the spring game. It's got to get some touch on it because it's got to get over top of certain guys, but you also can't float it. That looks like an RPO throw right there. You don't see a ton of these on the highlight film, but you see that one right there. So that's where his release will help him a little bit. But he is a quick decision maker. And that's something that I do like from this young man. But the power, it all comes down to the power. The kid's got a lot of arm talent. And you can see plays with a little bit of swagger too. But I really like this kid. We'll watch a couple more throws, and then I'm going to move on from Noah Grubbs to Brady Hart. There's a couple. If you haven't seen his freshman film, go back and watch his freshman film too, because there's some really good throws on that too. You can see he's younger and he's skinnier and his arm's not quite as strong. But when you talk about this kid's a freshman, he's probably 14 years old. You're like, holy moly, this kid's got some ability. That's a good throw where he's throwing it to a spot. Receiver's clearly not there yet. Lets him run right underneath it and get a touchdown. So that's a really big time throw there as well. Last couple, and then we'll move on. It's an RPO for a touchdown. Really good throw there. So a lot of talent here from Mr. Noah Grubbs. You can see why Notre Dame likes him as much as they do. So that's Noah Grubbs. Let's get into some conversation about Mr. Brady Hart here. Also, a 2026 quarterback from Cocoa High School in Florida. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, okay, who has the better talent around him? Well, the answer is Brady Hart. He's got Javen Boggs. He's got better players around him. But people will try to use these things to determine who you like more. I'm like, don't do that, because I'll tell you, yes, Brady Hart has better players around him. There's no doubt. But Brady Hart also, I think, plays against tougher competition. So it kind of balances itself out. They're both really, really good players. You don't need to look for things like that to try to find, answers for who you like better or worse. So let's talk a little bit about Brady Hart. Brady Hart, also from Florida, also has a very strange recruiting ranking. On3 has him ranked number 205. 247 Sports ranks him number 144. ESPN ranks him number 120. Rivals ranks him number 49. Once again, with Brady Hart, I tend to agree more with the Rivals ranking for him. I think that's more in line with what I believe his talent level and potential and production to be. Also has a very impressive offer list. He's got offers from Penn State. He's got offers from Arkansas, Miami, Iowa State, Michigan, Ole Miss, North Carolina, Pitt, Purdue, Texas A&M, and he also has an offer from Virginia Tech. So that's his offer list. Not quite as good as Noah Grubbs, at least from a what's reported standpoint. He also has an offer from Florida, but very, very similar offer list. Talent, again, you want to look at his high school statistics. He is another kid that had excellent high school statistics during his career at Cocoa. Brady, this past year, this is his first year as a starter. So that's the one thing that's different between him and Noah. This was Brady's first year as a starter. You look at his numbers, he completed 65.9% of his passes this year, played in 15 games, threw for 3,759 yards, averaged 250.6 yards per game, averaged 41 or threw for 41 touchdowns, and also had 11 interceptions this past season. Only rushed for 2 yards this past season, according to the statistics, and does not have any listed touchdowns here, but I thought I remembered him running in a touchdown or two in 2023. I'd have to go back and look at that, but I'll have to look at that. But he's a kid that we had him on our show as Ryan Roberts and Sean Davis interviewed him, and they talked about how his head coach would not let him run. He's actually a pretty good athlete, and I think there's some ability for him to become a runner. The guy that I compare him to is Trevor Lawrence. I'm not saying he's as good as Trevor Lawrence. I'm talking about in this one area where, if you remember, Trevor Lawrence as a freshman in college did not run a bunch. Ran a little bit more as a sophomore. It wasn't until his junior year that you really started to see the full potential of what Trevor Lawrence could do as a runner. And I think Brady has a little bit of that. But the reality is neither of these guys are dual threat quarterbacks. Brady has more ability to do damage with his legs. There's no doubt about that. But he's not Riley Leonard. You know what I mean? He's not Tyler Buckner as a runner. He's a drop back quarterback that's athletic enough to hurt you with his legs in ways that I don't know that Noah Grubbs can. So that's a little bit of the profile of Brady Hart. Obviously, one of his teammates, you're going to see catching a lot of the balls we're going to watch here in the film room, is Javon Boggs, who's a top target for Notre Dame in the 2025 class. So let's dive into the film, and this is going to be sophomore film of Brady Hart. The other thing you're going to see, he's skinnier than Noah Grubbs, but also a kid that has, in my opinion, a very good frame. He's listed anywhere from 6'4" to 6'5", about 185 to 190 pounds, a lot skinnier than Noah Grubbs. But what you're going to see is even though he's skinnier, he still has a pretty strong arm. I think Brady is one of those kids. His dad played baseball in college, played actually in the NFL a little bit. He's a kid that I think is going to fill out a lot, and when he fills out, he's going to get his arm's going to get a lot stronger. But he's got a really good feel for the game. You just look at this play right here. This is a very accurate throw, play action pass, boot to the right, sees the guy come open, accurately gets the ball outside. Really good throw. Doesn't quite come out of his hand with the same RPMs as what Noah Grubbs, but guys, there's not a huge difference. There's a lot of arm talent there as well. He's a guy that also has a longer release. I don't think Brady Hart's arm speed is as good as Noah Grubbs' arm speed. And I think that's something that Brady could maybe work on a little bit, but you just don't see that same explosiveness coming through the zone, which is going to explain why his ball doesn't quite get as much juice on it. But again, we're talking about a sophomore in high school. By the time this kid's a senior, you're going to see a lot more zip on the football. And he's going to have a lot more power. There's not going to be any throws that Brady Hart can't make by the time he's a senior in high school, much less by the time he gets to college. He's a smart kid, quick decision maker, a young man that throws a very catchable football. He's an accurate thrower. There's more consistency to his game, in my opinion. Really good feel. But it's just one of those things where I like his physical tools a lot. I don't know that I would say I think he has elite physical tools yet. He could get there. But sometimes you just watch a kid and you're like, I just love his feel for the game. And that's one of the things that I really like about Brady Hart. When you I'm thinking which playoff game. It was a playoff game he played in where he actually didn't play that well. His numbers weren't great. That's a throw to Javon Boggs. But he made plays when he needed to. And that's something you learn about a quarterback. It's like, okay, can you make money plays when you're not at your best? This is against St. Thomas Aquinas. So just put in the context of the kind of team he's playing against. This is obviously a team that's going to be loaded with talent. It's a good read, fits that slant right in between two guys. He's reading the flat defender, right? That's number 5. That's a linebacker. As soon as that guy starts working out the flat, he sees it. He knows I can hit that slant, but he's got to keep his eyes on the inside linebacker, 24. He's got to make sure that guy doesn't squeeze. He doesn't squeeze, gets the ball out quickly. Perfect placement on that ball, allows Javon Boggs to catch and run, and then he gets into the end zone for a touchdown. Good feel for the game, good timing. And he's another kid that's willing to take a hit. This is against St. Thomas Aquinas as well. Takes the hit, still gets the ball out. It's a touchdown. So he's a tough kid. You look at him, he's skinny. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's a tough kid. There's no doubt about that. Good touch here, good timing, getting that ball in that little cover 2 hole. He's thinking there's going to be some safety help there on the slot fade. This is a slot fade concept that you're going to hear me talk a lot about. If you're on the premium board, you've already seen a full 30-minute breakdown of the slot fade concept. This is a throw that Mike Denbrock likes to run a lot, and a throw that Mike Denbrock likes to run in the red zone a lot. And you see Brady Hart making that throw right there. Good mobility. You see him get find that guy down the field. It's a nice ball. That ball's got to get outside. That's one where he missed. You got to get that ball outside. It's one of those things you'll work on, right? So like what happens here is it's a quick throw. So he's rushing his footwork and he steps too narrow. So if you look at that left step, it's inside of the receiver. So now he's got to fight across his body. But because he's trying to rush the throw out there, he makes it a little bit harder on himself. This is like that throw we talked about with Noah Grubbs. You make this throw now, it's a touchdown. You make this throw against Benjamin Morrison in college, that's going 100 yards the other way for a touchdown. That's the learning process for young quarterbacks, and they're all going to have that type of stuff on film. I've said this before. It's funny the things some kids think are highlight films that are not really highlights. And so I love this throw. This is another slot fade. This is pretty well defended by that slot defender, but he just puts the ball where only his guy has a chance. I believe this is actually also the state title game. It's either state semis or state title game. That's a big time throw there by Brady Hart. That's a quicker release there, but as you can see, again, doesn't have quite the same power. The ball gets where it needs to get to. It's on time, and it's a touchdown for Coco. And this is a really talented kid as well. They're just different. They're different quarterbacks. I mean, that's the thing, is they're very different quarterbacks, but they're both excellent players. What I would say, one thing I like about Brady is, and this isn't relative to Noah Grubbs, this is what I like about Brady. He has a really nice feel for touch. He understands timing really well. He understands throwing guys open really well. For a young player, he's really advanced in that regard. But he can get some zip on it when he needs to. But as he gets older, his ability to power the football where it needs to go is going to improve. Here's a good run right here. You can see him. You can see the kind of the quickness here, quarterback draw. See the elusiveness, ability to make some guys miss. So you see what I'm saying? Like, you look at that, you don't think, oh, Riley Leonard part 2, but you think, okay, that's a guy that can do something with his legs. That's a guy that can do a little something if you need him to. This is where you see a little bit, just the ball just doesn't really power there, but it's still a good ball. Gets there with good zip. He's a good player. It's a good player. There's a lot of talent to work with. Good footwork. Kind of gets a little bit of a narrow gather step here. He's going to want to not do that and then step a little bit more. It's not bad. It's just one of those little things that you'll want to work on, because that tends to, when he gets that narrow step at the top, that tends to make his step a little bit more narrow, and it causes the ball to flow a little bit. Or if he drives a little bit more off that, you're going to see the ball really fly out and get a little bit more zip on it, lead the guy, and hit right on that dime. Here's some loose. Yeah, see, I thought he scored a touchdown. I'm pretty sure he scored there. And I thought I saw another play in the playoffs where he scored on the pilot. Now, here it is. Yeah, I thought that was a touchdown. I don't remember seeing a flag. So they didn't listen with any touchdowns rushing, but I thought he had a couple. As you can see here, throwing to the left, if you guys notice a pattern, throwing to the left, he tends to throw behind the receiver a lot. Watch here. Watch his step. So that left foot, not the plant leg, but the lead leg, right? It's too narrow. And so what it does is watch his follow through. He's fighting against the left side of his body. So because of where he steps, he's closed his hips off. And when you close your hips off that way, you're now forcing your upper body to fight against your lower body. Then when you're a young quarterback, that's going to cause you to be a little bit off target. That's why he's throwing behind. This is an easy fix. And I would be willing to bet you $20 that the quarterback coach he works with this year has this fixed before his junior season even starts. All that requires is just a little bit more of an open step there. You want to get your back foot parallel to your target, because what he's doing is, this is what young guys do sometimes. He's stepping to where the receiver is when he starts his motion, not to where he wants to throw it. He's much better about that to the right, but to the left, it's a little bit less natural, and you see his footwork doesn't quite get him there. And that's what causes it. Very correctable. And again, we're talking about a sophomore. Very correctable thing that you can get fixed down the road. And that's something that I think he'll definitely get better at. Here's a little bit more of that mobility. See, again, you got he's not a dynamic runner. I think some people kind of present it like, oh, this guy's going to be a dynamic dual threat quarterback. I don't know that he's a dual threat quarterback. I think he's a guy that can hurt you with his legs. A guy that can rush for 300-400 yards maybe on some scrambles and some read zones where he pulls and keeps it. But he's not a guy that's going to go out there and strike fear into the heart of the defense the way that a guy like Riley Leonard does, or a guy like, Tyler Buckner did before his injuries and things like that. I love the ball placement on this throw. It's time. He knows exactly where that linebacker is, and he knows exactly where he's got to throw it away from. But watch the lead step. It's a little bit more open this time, so he's not fighting against that guy. A little bit more open, so he's not fighting against his hips as much as he was before. You see that? And so what happens? Better ball placement. Ball gets outside. And a very correctable thing. Very correctable. Really good feel for the game, as you can see. Good pocket presence there. Feels the rush, steps into it, gets the ball right to the middle of his chest, doesn't let it hang, keeps his eyes downfield, and then boom, there he goes. Gets it over top for a play. Again, ball's behind a little bit, right? Watch his feet. He's fighting his hips a little bit. He'll get there. He'll get there. Lot of talent to work with. See, he's got the ball out, which I don't like, but as soon as he starts to make a move, watch him put that ball in the middle and protect it. I like that. I like that. A lot to work with here. This is a quarterback's coach's dream because there's a lot of tools. You know, he's just long and wiry, so there's a lot of moving parts that you kind of got to bring together. And when they do, boy, whew, he's going to be excellent. He's going to be excellent. Again, you see the mobility, not make it dynamic running plays, but good feel, good presence. He uses his legs to buy time and get some work done in the pass game. So again, I like the tools. Good feel. It's a good throw. Snaps it off, sees it, knows where he's going, snaps it off. Boom, right there, touchdown. Coco. Actually, not a touchdown. Close to a touchdown. A lot of tools to work with. So as you guys can see, both of these young men have a lot of talent. They're different players. They have different strengths to some degree, different weaknesses, but at the end of the day, they both have a lot of talent. And I think what you're seeing here is why Notre Dame has the view that they have when it comes to recruiting quarterbacks in this class. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Let's get just a couple more throws here of Brady, and then we'll move on and finish this thing up. Good touch here. All right. So that, everybody, is Brady Hart and Noah Grubbs. So here's where I'm at. And then here's where Notre Dame is. I'm actually on the same exact page of Notre Dame. People ask me, who do you like better? Well, I like Noah Grubbs better right now. And I would argue that I think if they both reach their full potential, that you could make a case that Brady Hart has a little bit higher ceiling, a lot of it having to do with his mobility, and he's a year behind from an experience standpoint of Noah Grubbs. I think Noah's always going to have the stronger arm. He's going to be a more powerful thrower. Brady's dual threat ability potential is what, again, he's not a pure dual threat guy, but he can be a guy that does more damage with his legs. His athletic, his running ability, to me, is a thing that I think ultimately could make him higher than Noah. Noah's got the higher floor, and he's got the better arm, just pure arm talent. But they're both very gifted players. So right now I would rank Noah ahead of Brady, and I'd give Brady the slight edge on upside as of right now. I think Brady's got a lot more room to get better. I'm curious to see if Noah changes my mind on that as juniors. But here's where we're at, guys. I would encourage all of you to have this view. Don't be Team Brady. Don't be Team Noah. Be happy. Be Team Notre Dame. If Notre Dame can get one of these two kids, they're going to have an excellent quarterback, top 50 caliber quarterback prospect in this class. They're going to have a big, tall kid that can do a lot of damage from the pocket, that can run Mike Denbrock's offense, that can get the ball down the field. They bring different strengths to the game, but they're both very talented players, and guys can have a big impact. Where Notre Dame is, I've done a lot of digging on this, and I've tried to ask probing questions to see if I'm, okay, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And what I can basically read from it is they think both of these kids are great players. They think both of these kids are talented players. They think both of these kids are difference makers at the next level, potentially. And they would take either one of them, be happy, thrilled with either one of them. That's where I'm at. I mean, look, you can prefer one guy or the other. For me, there's things I like about Noah more. There's things I like about Brady more. I rank Noah slightly higher now. You get either one of them, it's a big win. That's how I look at it. And I've had people, I'll be disappointed if they don't get Brady Hart. Well, okay, well, who they get though? Well, if they get Noah Grubbs, well, that's just it's the wrong way to look at it. I'm not. If they don't get Noah Grubbs, I'm going to be disappointed. Well, what if they get Brady Hart? Don't be that way, right? These are both excellent players. These are both the excellent prospects, and that's kind of how I look at it. I think they're both heck of a players. I'm not quite sure why people prefer one guy or the other. I would love to have that conversation. That should be a fun conversation to have. We've probably had it on the board at some point in time, but I'd love to hear from some of you guys in the chat, but also on the board of what is it about one guy or the other that you prefer? I think that'd be a fun conversation because I think you can make cases for both players of why you like it. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame would be happy with either one of these two guys. If they're able to land either one of them, that's a win. And that's where I'm at. I'm really not on team whoever on these two kids. I think they're both excellent prospects. I think they can both be great ringleaders. And if you get one of the two, and this is the key, you've got to get them. I mean, it's not a given you're going to get either one of them right now. And I'm pretty confident in saying that right now neither one of them have committed to Notre Dame. I have heard there's times where I think Brady was closest to deciding. There's been times when Noah was closer to deciding. So we'll see who wants to come first. But what I've been told is it's going to be a first come, first serve for the quarterback in this class. And so I think landing either one of them is going to be a very, very important piece of this puzzle. And we'll see. We'll see which one pulls the trigger, and if Notre Dame is able to get one. But you get one, then all of a sudden the quarterback recruiting at Notre Dame is just completely changed. I've pointed out years where I thought Notre Dame had 4 years in a row where it was pretty good. I don't know that if they get Grubbs or Brady Hart, that previous year was as good as this. And I'm referring to 2011 when you got Everett Golson, 2012 you got Gunnar Keel, 2013 you got Malik Zaire, 2014 you got Deshaun Kaiser. I think this run is better, just from a standpoint of high school recruiting. If you get Noah Grubbs or Brady Hart, I think the Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr, Deuce Knight, and then whoever of the 26 kids you get, I think that's the best 4-year stretch they've had since I've been following Notre Dame. I think that's just an outstanding 4-year haul. And what it does is, as I've said before, it increases your margin for error. You're going to have some misses on some of these guys aren't going to pan out. Somebody's going to transfer or get hurt or not be as good as you think. But when you recruit this well year after year after year after year, you've greatly enhanced your chances that somebody's going to pan out and be really good. And that's what has me excited. And you go back to what we started the show on about closing the gap. It's players like Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr and Deuce Knight and both of Noah Grubbs and Brady Hart that are guys you get if you're trying to close the gap at quarterback. Individually, they're all gap closers. The fact that Notre Dame has been able to get them in back-to-back classes and hopefully can continue that in 2026 is impressive. And now it's just about, can you develop them? That's the final question. Can you finish this off when we get these guys, and can you develop them? That's going to be the key. Because here's the deal. We talk a lot about how receiver recruiting has got to get better. Y'all have to understand something. When you start recruiting quarterback the way that Notre Dame is, it's not going to take very long before receivers around the country start saying, Notre Dame keeps stocking up on quarterbacks every year. So whether it's CJ or Kenny or Deuce, I'm going to play with somebody can spin it. And that's when you start seeing receiver talent start coming in more and more and more. So between what I think Mike Denbrock's offense is going to look like this year, the type of quarterbacks that Notre Dame is now landing and hopefully can continue in 26, they haven't closed the deal yet. Got to close the deal. You're going to be in a situation now that alone is going to move the needle in a big way when it comes to receiver recruiting, to the point where you don't necessarily need Mike Brown to get better. You just need to evaluate, identify who you want, sick Chad on him, sick Denbrock on him. Mike Brown can do what you do, but I need you to coach him up at a high level. If the evaluation and the coaching from Mike Brown is elite, then I can let Chad Bowden and Mike Denbrock do more of the recruiting. Just make sure you're getting the right guys. But what's going to help a ton is what Gino Guidugli is doing, recruiting quarterbacks. That's going to help a ton. And if they can do that, then it's gonna be a fun ride, everybody. So that's going to do it for today's show. Went a lot longer than I anticipated, but you start talking about closing the gap in quarterbacks, and you guys kind of had to know that it was going to go a little bit long. You kind of had to know that. Before we go, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys would continue to show your support by not only watching this show, but also listening to our podcast, downloading our podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, any of your favorite podcast platforms. If you just check those, the way it works is we get credit every 60 seconds. If you listen to at least 60 seconds, we get credit for it and helps us grow. And of course, sign up from our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com and show your support for what we're doing that way as well. So everybody have an awesome rest of your day. We have IB Nation Sports Talk coming up here in about a half an hour. I'll be back again tomorrow. We're going to have our buy, sell, or hold segment tomorrow. Right. So I'm going to go get that on the message board now in case somebody hasn't done it. So I'm going to have some fun with the buy, sell, or hold tomorrow. Going to have some more. We'll talk about some different position groups that we'll dive into as well. Thursday, I'll be back with another show breaking the team down, and then Friday mailbag. I don't know if Ryan told you guys this or not yesterday. I believe that he did, but we're now going back to recruiting hour on Monday, and the Friday mailbag is going to be back. And so that's going to be the case all rest of the spring and into the summer. That is what we're going to be doing. So make sure you check that out at Irish Breakdown. And so thank you all again. I'll talk to you again very soon on, as I said, bad ending. I did not end this one well, but we're going to be back. We're going to be back for another great show tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a great day, everybody. See you soon.